Hey there, tonight we're diving into prehistoric Australia, where the truth is this ancient realm was teeming with creatures so bizarre and colossal, it makes Hollywood nightmares look tame. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now find your comfort zone, perhaps turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's venture into tonight's story together. 60,000 years ago, Australia was the kind of place that would make even the most adventurous modern-day backpacker turn around, clutching their lonely planet guide like a security blanket. The sheer scale of the continent was already daunting, with its vast deserts, dense forests, and a coastline that stretched on like the world's longest roller coaster ride. But it was the residents that really made it memorable or nightmare-inducing, depending on your perspective. Into the first humans, a group of early Australians who decided that living in proximity to kangaroos the size of delivery vans sounded like a great idea. These early Aussies, intrepid as they were, landed on this massive island continent via land bridges and primitive boats, a testament to both their ingenuity and perhaps a touch of insanity. They weren't just facing a new environment, they were stepping into a world populated by creatures that seemed ripped straight from a B-grade monster flick. Take the Diprotodon, for example. This creature was essentially a wombat on steroids, weighing in at over 3 tons. Imagine a furry, 4-legged tank barreling through the underbrush, and you've got a pretty good idea of what these folks were dealing with. But wait, there's more. Picture a bird that makes an ostrich look like a sparrow. Meet Geniones, a flightless bird towering at over 7 feet tall and equipped with a beak that could probably slice through a watermelon like it was a soft cheese. And if you thought modern Australian wildlife was terrifying, these prehistoric beasts were the stuff of legends, or nightmares, depending on how close you got. The early settlers weren't just surviving, they were navigating a landscape that seemed designed to test the limits of human endurance and creativity. Now, you might imagine these early Australians as rugged survivalists, making Bear Grylls look like a city slicker. And you'd be right, but only partly. They were indeed resourceful, employing a mix of hunting, gathering, and possibly some early forms of agriculture to eke out a living. They understood the land in a way that most of us today can only dream of, reading the subtle signs of nature like a well-worn map. But let's not romanticize it too much. This was no walk in the park. The landscape was harsh, and the climate swung between extremes like a pendulum on a sugar high. Nevertheless, these people adapted. They utilized every resource available, from the towering eucalyptus trees to the sprawling plains. Their tools were crafted with precision, using materials that would make a modern-day DIY enthusiast weep with envy. Stone, bone, and wood were transformed into weapons and utensils, the ancient equivalent of a Swiss army knife. And they needed every bit of that versatility to deal with the megafauna that roamed the land. Imagine trying to take down a creature with skin as thick as a phone book using nothing but a spear crafted from local timbers. Yet they did it, or at least they tried. The early Australians were nothing if not persistent, adapting their strategies and tools over generations. They became masters of their environment, capable of surviving in regions where modern humans would struggle to last a weekend. Let's not forget the social dynamics, either. These early communities were likely complex and highly organized. You didn't just go out and hunt a Diprotodon without a plan. It required coordination, teamwork, and probably a fair amount of arguing about who got the short straw to act as bait. They shared a rich oral tradition, passing down stories and knowledge that were as vital to their survival as any physical tool. So, why does any of this matter today? Well, understanding these early Australians challenges our perceptions of prehistoric life. It wasn't all about brute strength and survival of the fittest. It was about intelligence, adaptability, and a deep connection to the land that sustained them. And while we might chuckle at the idea of sharing our world with giant kangaroos and oversized birds, these creatures were an integral part of the ecosystem. Their interactions with early humans shaped the course of history on this vast, untamed continent. In short, prehistoric Australia was a world of extremes, a place where the line between survival and extinction was razor-thin. It was a proving ground for humanity's tenacity and ingenuity, a testament to our ability to adapt and thrive in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. And if you think today's Australia is a land of adventure, just be glad you weren't around when the wildlife was bigger, meaner, and a whole lot hungrier. If you think today's Australian wildlife is a bit too rowdy for comfort, just be grateful you weren't around during the reign of the megafauna. These oversized critters were the real stars of the prehistoric show, and they made today's deadly spiders and snakes look like mere party favors. Let's start with the Diprotodon, which was basically a wombat on protein shakes. Weighing in at over 3 tons and stretching as long as a compact car, it was the largest marsupial to ever walk, or lumber, across the earth. Just imagine a furry bulldozer with an appetite for the local flora. This veg-loving behemoth roamed the Australian woodlands and scrublands, munching on leaves, fruits, and bark with the kind of dedication you'd expect from a dedicated vegan at a salad bar. But don't let its herbivorous diet fool you. A herd of these gentle giants would have been a real force of nature, reshaping the landscape as they foraged. They were the prehistoric version of lawnmowers, but instead of trimming your hedges, they were probably taking out entire bushes. So, how did these colossal critters end up on the extinct list? Well, that's where the plot thickens. Enter the demon ducks of doom, or if you want to get all scientific about it, Dramoni stertoni. These birds were the stuff of nightmares, or at least a Hitchcock film. Standing over 10 feet tall, they were like ostriches on steroids, with a penchant for terrifying all who crossed their path. With a beak that could crush bones, these flightless wonders were the ultimate bad birds of their time. And while they might not have been chasing people down for a quick snack, the thought of one of these towering over you is enough to make anyone reconsider their choice of prehistoric vacation spots. The extinction of these megafauna, though, is a tale wrapped in mystery and conjecture. While some like to point fingers at climate change, which certainly had its mood swings back then, others believe early humans played a significant role. It's hard to say whether these ancient Australians were the original overhunters, but the evidence suggests that human activity might have tipped the balance. The question is, were these early settlers really the masterminds behind a prehistoric extinction event, or were they just trying to survive alongside some of the world's most formidable creatures? It's tempting to romanticize the idea of humans as the ultimate hunters, taking down beasts with nothing more than a spear and sheer determination. But the truth is probably less glamorous. Picture a group of humans faced with a Diprotodon. The logistics alone would require more than just bravery and a sharp stick. We're talking detailed planning, strategic thinking, and a willingness to face a creature that could flatten you like a pancake. The reality is, these megafauna were likely more victims of circumstance than the deliberate targets of human ambition. Take the Diprotodon's extinction around 25,000 years ago. The climate was cooling, which would have made the vegetation they relied upon less abundant. Couple that with the fact that even the most resourceful humans would have struggled to take down such a massive beast consistently, and you start to see how a combination of factors could have led to their demise. And let's not forget, it's hard to maintain a thriving population when you're the size of a small house, and the climate is changing faster than you can adapt. As for the demon ducks, their fate is equally shrouded in the mists of time. Some theories suggest they succumbed to the same environmental pressures as the Diprotodon, while others propose that they fell victim to the changing landscapes that couldn't support their gigantic forms. Whatever the reason, their bones now serve as a reminder of a time when Australia was less about kangaroos and koalas, and more about colossal critters that made even the bravest humans think twice. So, while it's easy to get swept up in the romance of humans as nature's conquerors, the reality is much more nuanced. These early Australians were not just hunters. They were survivors, navigating a world of shifting climates and formidable wildlife. Their legacy is not one of domination, but of adaptation and resilience. They lived in a world where the line between friend and foe was often blurred, and survival meant understanding the land and its creatures in ways we can only begin to imagine. In the end, the tale of Australia's megafauna is not just a story about what was lost, but a testament to the complex interplay between humans and nature. It's a narrative filled with giants, both literal and metaphorical, and a reminder that history is never as simple as it seems. As we continue our journey into this prehistoric landscape, we'll uncover even more about the creatures that once roamed this ancient continent and the people who lived alongside them, shaping a rich tapestry of life that echoes into the present day. As we continue our prehistoric stroll through Australia, let's dive into the climatic roller coaster that was the Pleistocene epoch. Imagine Earth as a moody teenager. One moment, it's all ice-cold glares, ice ages, and the next it's warming up to the idea of having a sunny disposition, interglacial periods. During the Pleistocene, which kicked off about 2.6 million years ago and carried on until around 700 years ago, the climate was as indecisive as a kid in a candy store. These shifts had monumental effects on the Australian ecosystem, reshaping the land and challenging its inhabitants in ways that make today's climate debates look like a mild disagreement over the thermostat. Now, Australia wasn't exactly getting snowed in, but the global cooling did lead to drier conditions, with deserts expanding like they were trying to set a world record. Rainforests shrank faster than a wool sweater in a hot wash, making room for grasslands and open woodlands. These changes weren't just a backdrop, they were the stage upon which early humans had to perform their daily survival dance. The cooler, drier climate meant fewer resources and harsher living conditions, but let's not underestimate these early Australians. They were anything but your stereotypical cavemen grunting their way through life. Their ingenuity was as sharp as the tools they crafted, which we'll get to in a moment. First, let's address the myth of the prehistoric human as a club-wielding brute. Sure, the image is entertaining, but it's about as accurate as a Hollywood historical drama. Lots of drama, not so much history. These early humans were more like survival engineers, constantly innovating and adapting to their changing world. Take their tool-making skills. They didn't just grab the nearest rock and hope for the best. Oh no, they were discerning craftspeople. They used a technique called napping, which sounds like something you'd do on a lazy afternoon, but was actually a sophisticated method of shaping stone into sharp-edged tools. Imagine crafting a spearhead with precision so fine it could rival a modern sculptor's chisel. These tools weren't just for show. They were the key to unlocking the resources of their environment. Stone axes and spears allowed them to hunt the megafauna we discussed earlier, while smaller tools were perfect for processing plant materials. They even used grinding stones, basically prehistoric food processors, to turn seeds and nuts into edible pastes. Talk about resourcefulness. And let's not forget their use of fire. Far from being accidental fire starters, these early horses used controlled burning to manage the landscape, encourage new growth, and drive animals into their traps. If that doesn't scream innovation, I don't know what does. Socially, these communities were more complex than a soap opera plot. The need for cooperation in hunting and gathering meant they had to develop intricate social structures. They had to communicate, plan, and execute complex strategies, which suggests a level of sophistication that would put many modern-day team-building exercises to shame. Forget trust falls and icebreakers. These folks were the real deal, coordinating hunts and sharing resources with a finesse that ensured survival. Their social fabric was tightly woven with cultural practices and oral traditions, passing down knowledge as if it were the most precious heirloom. The stories they told and the wisdom shared were critical survival tools, just as vital as any spear or axe. This cultural continuity provided a sense of identity and cohesion, helping them navigate a world in which adaptability was the name of the game. So, what does all this say about human innovation? For starters, it shatters the myth of prehistoric people as mere footnotes in history. They were pioneers, constantly pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Their ability to adapt to the shifting climates of the Pleistocene speaks volumes about human resilience and creativity. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving in a world that was anything but stable. In the grand tapestry of history, these early Australians were weaving threads of ingenuity and adaptability that continue to resonate today. Their legacy is a reminder that human beings are not just products of their environment, but shapers of it. As we grapple with our own climate challenges, perhaps there's a lesson to be learned from these ancient innovators, that with creativity, cooperation, and a bit of grit, we too can navigate the complexities of our world, one climate swing at a time. And so, as we leave behind the Pleistocene epoch's climatic drama and head towards the next chapter in our prehistoric journey, Let's remember to tip our hats to those early Australians. They may not have had smartphones or streaming services, but they mastered the art of survival in a world that was as unpredictable as a kangaroo on a trampoline. We'll explore more of their fascinating legacy next time, so hold onto your boomerangs. There's plenty more history where that came from. As we hop off the Pleistocene roller coaster and dive into the cultural currents that have flowed through Australia for tens of thousands of years, let's pause and admire the Aboriginal people's profound connection to the land and its creatures. These folks weren't just surviving on a whim. They were weaving intricate tapestries of life, spirituality, and community, all tightly interwoven with the earth beneath their feet. Picture a world where every hill, waterhole, and kangaroo had a story, a chapter in a vast, unwritten book passed down through generations. Now, before we get swept up in some idyllic vision of harmonious coexistence, let's inject a little reality check. Yes, the bond between these early Australians and their environment was strong, but it wasn't about holding hands and singing Come Bear. This was a complex society with rules, territories, and spiritual obligations. They weren't just living off the land, they were living with it, managing resources with a sophistication that would make modern-day environmentalists take notes. Take the concept of dream time, or the dreaming. It's not just a bedtime story for anthropologists. These were the creation myths that explained the world and provided a blueprint for living within it. The dreaming was a spiritual GPS, mapping out the land and its significance in a way that Google Maps could only dream of. It connected the people to their ancestors, to each other, and to the land itself, creating an interwoven network of meaning and responsibility. And wouldn't you know it, this wasn't just some ancient lore to be filed under quaint. The practices stemming from these beliefs are still alive today, guiding many indigenous groups in how they interact with their environment. Now for a dose of myth-busting. The term noble savages often gets thrown around like confetti at a history symposium. But let's pump the brakes on that romanticized vision. These weren't simple, idyllic societies, untouched by the complexities of life. Aboriginal Australians were managing vast territories, complete with trade routes and social hierarchies. They had economies that might not have involved Wall Street, but were certainly rich in barter and resource management. Stone, ochre, and even seashells were traded across hundreds of miles, establishing networks that were as complex as any trading app on your smartphone. And how about their environmental management skills? While some might think of them as passive inhabitants, they were actively shaping their world. Take fire stick farming, for example. This wasn't just about lighting up a campfire for weekend marshmallows. It was a carefully orchestrated practice of controlled burning to manage vegetation, encourage the growth of certain plant species, and prevent larger, uncontrolled bushfires. These early Australians were essentially conducting symphonies of fire and renewal, tuning their environment to the beat of survival. Let's not skip over the sacred sites scattered across the continent. These weren't just scenic rest stops. They were profound markers of spiritual and cultural significance. Uluru, for example, isn't just a photogenic backdrop for your holiday snaps. It's a site deeply embedded with stories and ceremonies that resonate with the Anangu people who have called it sacred for millennia. And this isn't some ancient relic. It's a living tradition with ongoing cultural practices. And while we're at it, let's talk about the fauna. The creatures of the land weren't just dinner options or obstacles to overcome. They were totems, spiritual guides, and sometimes ancestors in animal form. The rainbow serpent, a mythic creature in many Aboriginal cultures, isn't just a colorful story. It's a symbol of creation, water, and life itself. Imagine a creature that embodies the cycles of nature, linking the people not just to the land, but to the very essence of existence. It's like having a spiritual encyclopedia that teaches you how to live harmoniously with the natural world. But let's not get too misty-eyed. Life wasn't all spiritual enlightenment and ecological harmony. These societies faced their share of challenges, from territorial disputes to resource scarcity. They had to navigate a world where survival meant making tough choices. Imagine negotiating with neighboring clans over hunting rights, or dealing with the fallout of a failed harvest. This was a world where diplomacy, strategy, and sometimes conflict were as much a part of life as the spiritual connections that bound them. So, As we continue to unearth the layers of prehistoric Australia, let's remember that these early Australians were anything but passive players in a simple narrative. They were complex, adaptive, and deeply connected to their world in ways that challenge our modern perceptions. And as we ponder the legacy they've left behind, perhaps we can learn a thing or two about living with intention, respect, and a little bit of clever fire management. As we prepare to step into the next chapter of our journey, keep your eyes open and your mind even more so. There's a wealth of history to explore, stories to unravel, and lessons to learn from those who walked this land long before us. And who knows, maybe we'll find a few surprises along the way. As we forge ahead into the heart of prehistoric Australia's legacy, let's dive into the juicy bits of what these ancient survivors left us. Sure, the landscape may not be teeming with gargantuan kangaroos anymore, but the echoes of those times are still very much alive. Think of it as the ultimate survival guide, penned not in ink, but in the land itself, and the stories passed down through the ages. First up, let's tackle the lingering mysteries of this epoch. You see, prehistoric Australia is like that enigmatic relative who shows up at family gatherings. Fascinating, a bit mysterious, and leaving you with more questions than answers. For starters, how did these early Australians manage to thrive in an environment that seemed determined to make life difficult? The climate was as fickle as a reality TV contestant, swinging between extremes with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Yet, these people adapted with a resilience that would make even the hardiest of modern survivalists nod in admiration. It wasn't just about brute endurance. It was about a deep understanding of their environment, a connection as unshakable as a kangaroo's tail on the outback. We can't forget about the environmental lessons these ancient pioneers have gifted us. Today's world is, shall we say, a bit of a hot mess when it comes to climate and environmental issues. But if we could channel some of that prehistoric savoir-faire, we might just find our way out of this ecological quagmire. These early Australians were the original eco-warriors, practicing sustainable living before it was a hashtag. They managed resources with a deft touch, knowing when to take and when to give back, a balance that's glaringly absent in our modern hustle for more. For instance, their controlled burning techniques weren't just a neat trick. They were a sophisticated method of land management that prevented catastrophic fires and promoted biodiversity. Imagine if we applied some of that wisdom today. It's not about romanticizing the past, but learning from it, taking those lessons and applying them to our concrete jungles and sprawling suburbs. It's like having a direct line to the past, with ancient voices whispering, "Hey, maybe don't burn down the whole forest this time." Let's also tip our hats to the indigenous knowledge that has been passed down through generations like a sacred heirloom. Despite centuries of upheaval and the often brutal impositions of colonial systems, this knowledge endures. It's a testament to the strength and resilience of indigenous cultures. Their stories, their wisdom, it's all part of a living history that continues to inform and inspire. This isn't about indulging in some noble savage fantasy. It's about recognizing the depth and complexity of a culture that's been navigating this land for tens of thousands of years. Speaking of complexity, let's bust the myth that these early Australians were simple folk living in isolated pockets of wilderness. Reality. They were connected by trade networks that would make even the savviest modern entrepreneur take notes. These trade routes spanned vast distances, exchanging goods like stone, ochre, and even seashells across what would now be several states. It's like the Silk Road, Arcee edition, except instead of silk and spices, it's all about the raw materials that sustained life and culture. The political and social dynamics were equally intricate. Forget the idea of small, isolated bands eking out a meager existence. These were communities with complex social structures and sophisticated governance systems. They were adept at managing territories, negotiating alliances, and resolving disputes. It's a social fabric as rich and complex as the tapestry of stars in the Australian night sky. Now, let's pause and reflect on the romance of it all. Yes, there's an undeniable allure to the idea of a world populated by megafauna and the intrepid humans who dared to live among them. There's a certain magic in imagining a landscape untouched by modern development, where the only skyscrapers were the towering gum trees and the horizon stretched on forever. But let's not get carried away with the romance. and forget the harsh realities. Life was tough, and survival was a daily challenge. The romance is there, but it's grounded in the grit and determination it took to carve out a life in a wild and unforgiving land. So what's the takeaway from this prehistoric saga? It's a reminder of the ingenuity and adaptability that have always been hallmarks of the human spirit. It's a call to appreciate the rich tapestry of our shared history, to honor the lessons of the past while forging ahead into the future. And perhaps most importantly, it's about recognizing the importance of preserving and respecting indigenous knowledge. These are not just relics of a bygone era, but living traditions that have much to teach us about resilience and sustainability. As we wrap up this journey through prehistoric Australia, let's carry forward the stories, the wisdom, and the lessons. Let's celebrate the romance of the past while acknowledging the realities that shaped it. In the end, it's about finding that balance between past and present, between myth and reality, and weaving it into the fabric of our own lives. After all, history isn't just something that happened a long time ago. It's a living, breathing part of who we are, and it's up to us to keep the story going. So here's to the ancient Australians and the legacy they've left us. May we honor it well. In the sun-drenched sands of ancient Egypt, where pharaohs were practically guards walking among mortals, a young prince was about to send shockwaves through a civilization that had endured for over 2 millennia. This prince, Amenhotep IV, would later get his name changed to Akhenaten, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. At first glance, Amenhotep IV early life might have seemed as standard as it gets for Egyptian royalty, a world stuffed with more opulence than a modern-day billionaire's yacht collection. He was born around 1380 BC, and if there's one thing that's clear, it's that he wasn't exactly groomed to be the next big thing in Egyptian politics. His older brother, Thutmose, was the one initially pegged for the throne, but as fate would have it, Thutmose took an early exit from the world stage, leaving the path clear for our boy Amenhotep. Now, Amenhotep IV was never quite the poster child for Egyptian traditionalism. Picture a young prince who might have been more at home in a philosophy seminar than leading a chariot charge. In a time when the role of a pharaoh was to uphold the multitude of gods and maintain the complex religious machinery that had been ticking along smoothly for centuries, Amenhotep IV was as likely to be found meditating on monotheism as mastering the art of statecraft. His sudden rise to power around 1353 BC probably felt a bit like handing over the keys of a vintage Ferrari to a teenager with a penchant for radical ideas. And boy, did he have ideas. Amenhotep IV wasn't just content with inheriting the throne and keeping the status quo. No, he had bigger plans, like redefining the very fabric of Egyptian religion. Enter Aten, the sun disk, who Amenhotep IV believed was the one true god, ditching the traditional pantheon of Egyptian deities faster than you can say polytheism is so last century. In a move that screamed, let's see what happens if we shake things up, he laid the foundation for what we might call the first recorded attempt at monotheism. Now, if you're thinking this didn't sit well with the priests of Ammon, who had been enjoying their cushy roles in Thebes for centuries, you'd be absolutely right. The priesthood was the backbone of Egyptian society, wielding as much, if not more, power than the pharaoh himself in certain respects. They controlled vast amounts of land and wealth, and Amenhotep IV guard swap was like pulling a Jenga block out of a tower that had stood for generations. It wasn't just a religious shift, it was a seismic political move that threatened to upend the economic and social structure of Egypt itself. The early years of his reign were marked by this brewing storm. Amenhotep IV, soon to be known as Akhenaten, was determined to make Aten the central figure of worship, and he wasn't exactly subtle about it. He began by changing his own name to Akhenaten, meaning effective for Aten, a not-so-subtle hint at his devotion. But let's not romanticize his theological rebellion as merely a spiritual awakening. This was as much about consolidating power as it was about personal belief. By elevating Aten, Akhenaten effectively sidelined the powerful Ammon priesthood, redirecting resources and attention to his new god, and thereby tightening his grip on the reins of power. The common Egyptian, meanwhile, probably watched this celestial soap opera unfold with a mix of confusion and curiosity. Their daily lives were steeped in tradition, their homes filled with small household shrines to the old gods. So when Akhenaten started building temples dedicated solely to Aten, it was akin to swapping out your cherished family recipes for some avant-garde molecular gastronomy. Sure, it was novel, but was it necessary? And more importantly, would it sustain them? This wasn't just a theological terre-à-terre. It was a full-blown cultural upheaval. Akhenaten initiated the construction of a new capital, Akhenaten, modern-day Amarna, which was to be the shining beacon of his Aten-centric universe. It was like deciding to move the Vatican to a brand new city because you preferred the view. The city sprang up in the middle of nowhere, a sprawling testament to Aten, complete with stunning temples and opulent palaces. As a fun fact, the city was built in just a few years, a feat of ancient engineering that would make even the most ambitious modern urban planners break out in a cold sweat. But while the palaces rose, and the sun shone brightly over Akhenaten, back in Thebes, the Ammon priests were probably sharpening their metaphorical knives, plotting their next move. Akhenaten's religious revolution was far from a smooth transition. It was more like a series of controlled detonations. The traditional gods, from Osiris to Ra, were given the cold shoulder, their temples falling into neglect as Aten's star rose ever higher. And although Akhenaten had a vision, the reality was that he was playing a dangerous game, one that would eventually see his once glorious city abandoned to the sands. So there you have it. The early years of Akhenaten's reign were a whirlwind of divine ambition and political chess, setting the stage for one of the most intriguing chapters in ancient history. As the sun set over Akhenaten and rose again each day, the question loomed. Could one man's vision reshape the spiritual landscape of an entire civilization, or was Akhenaten simply a sun-worshipping dreamer whose reach exceeded his grasp? Either way, the ripples of his decisions were only just beginning to spread across the Nile. Like a cosmic chess piece moved by a sun-obsessed player, Akhenaten's decision to construct Akhenaten was less about urban aesthetics and more about escaping the shadow of Thebes and its traditional gods. This wasn't your average city planning endeavor. It was the ancient equivalent of Elon Musk announcing he's building a new city on Mars. The whole operation kicked off around 1346 BC, and oh boy, did it set tongues wagging. Akhenaten wasn't just a few huts and a market square. It was an entire metropolis, complete with temples that would make even the grandest of ancient architects reach for their drafting tablets. Now, let's talk logistics because, spoiler alert, moving a capital city on a whim isn't exactly a weekend project. Akhenaten, with his penchant for making colossal decisions without consulting the masses, decreed that Akhenaten should rise from the sands of what is now known as Amarna. This wasn't just a few miles down the river from Thebes. It was a good 250 miles away. That's a fair stretch even by today's standards, and back then, it was akin to relocating your entire life to a remote island with no Wi-Fi. The location was strategically chosen, perched on the east bank of the Nile, where the horizon lit up with the first rays of the sun, prime real estate for a pharaoh who had a direct line to the sun god Aten. Building a city from scratch was like playing an ancient game of Sim City, but without the luxury of clicking undo when things went pear-shaped. It required a massive workforce and resources that would make any treasurer weep. Stone was quarried, wood was transported, and food needed to be supplied to the thousands of workers toiling under the relentless Egyptian sun. Akhenaten's dream city was a costly affair, siphoning off resources that could have gone to more, let's say, practical applications, like feeding the nation or maintaining the existing infrastructure. But here's the kicker. This wasn't just about getting closer to Aten. It was also about getting away from Thebes, where the Ammon priesthood was beginning to feel like a thorn in Akhenaten's side, one that was getting sharper by the day. By moving the capital, he could physically distance himself from these pesky priests who had their fingers in every pie from politics to economics. Akhenaten was meant to be a fresh start, a place where Aten could shine undisturbed by the mutterings of those clinging to the old ways. Picture it as Akhenaten's personal utopia, a place where his vision for religious reform could materialize without being challenged by the die-hard traditionalists. However, in the grand scheme of things, not everyone was thrilled about this sunlit exodus. Imagine being a craftsman from Thebes, suddenly told to pack up your life and move to a barren patch of desert because the boss had a revelation. The economic strain was palpable. The relocation impacted trade, agriculture, and the local economies of established cities. Moving the administrative heart of Egypt was like yanking a plant from its pot and expecting it to thrive on a windowsill with no soil. Yes, it might survive, but at what cost? Meanwhile, the national treasury was stretched thinner than a catwalk model on a crash diet. The kingdom's resources were funneled into constructing Akhenaten, leaving little for other pressing matters like, maintaining a standing army or managing the ever-looming threat of foreign adversaries. Egypt wasn't a self-sustaining utopia. It was a massive, complex system that required constant attention to keep the wheels turning. Akhenaten's obsessive focus on his new city was like a CEO who decides to revamp the office while ignoring plummeting stock prices. The chaos wasn't just economic. Socially, the upheaval was monumental. People who had worshipped a pantheon of gods for generations were now being nudged, or shoved, depending on your perspective, towards a singular devotion to Aten. Imagine waking up one day to find that all your favorite TV shows had been cancelled, and the only thing on air was a 24/7 Aten channel. For the average Egyptian, this shift was baffling and disruptive. It wasn't just about faith, it was about identity. The old gods were woven into the very fabric of daily life, and to suddenly have that ripped away was akin to deleting the cultural hard drive of a civilization. Yet their Akhenaten stood, a gleaming city born from the sands, a testament to Akhenaten's vision or stubbornness, depending on how you see it. It was as much a political statement as it was a religious one, a monument to both divine devotion and human folly. The city's rapid construction, completed in just a few years, was a marvel of ancient engineering. But beneath the impressive facade lay a foundation built on shaky political ground and an economy teetering on the brink. In Akhenaten, the temples dedicated to Aten were grand and open, basking in the sunlight, a stark contrast to the shadowy sanctuaries of the old gods. The city was dotted with palaces and estates for the elite, while the common folk were left to adapt as best they could. It was a place where Akhenaten's vision could shine brightly, unimpeded by the traditions of the past. But as the sun rose over this new capital, the question remained, was Akhenaten a beacon of a new dawn, or merely a mirage in the desert, destined to fade as quickly as it had appeared? As the city's population swelled with those who followed the call of the Pharaoh, the rest of Egypt watched with a mix of intrigue and skepticism. Akhenaten's experiment was bold, no doubt, but the underlying tensions simmered just below the surface. The Amun priesthood, though physically distanced, was far from defeated, and whispers of discontent echoed through the corridors of power. Meanwhile, the empire faced external pressures, with border regions left vulnerable as resources were diverted to sustain the sun-kissed dream of Akhenaten. And so, with the sun casting long shadows over the new capital, Akhenaten's gamble with destiny unfolded. The city, a glorious tribute to Aten, stood as a testament to both innovation and hubris. Akhenaten had reshaped the landscape and altered the course of Egyptian history, but at what cost, and with what consequences? The story of Akhenaten was far from over, and the ripples of its creation would continue to spread, challenging the very core of Egyptian society. As Akhenaten rose and glimmered in the desert sun, one couldn't help but wonder about the man behind this grandiose vision. Akhenaten himself. Beneath the sun-kissed facade of his new city lay a personal life, as intriguing and unconventional as the religious reforms he championed. Enter Nefertiti, his queen, partner in revolution, and arguably one of the most famous faces in history. Literally. Her bust, which currently resides in Berlin, has been the subject of admiration and controversy alike. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Nefertiti was more than just a pretty face. She was a political powerhouse in her own right. Their marriage, a union that unfolded around 1352 BC, wasn't just about love. Though the romantic in us might like to think so, it was a strategic alliance. Nefertiti was believed to be of noble lineage, possibly even a foreign princess, a fact that could have strengthened Akhenaten's diplomatic ties. Together, they were the ancient world's power couple, the Jay-Z and Beyoncé of the 18th Dynasty, minus the paparazzi, but with plenty of hieroglyphic fanfare. Now, let's talk about those family portraits. If you've ever seen them, you know they're more avant-garde than anything you'd expect from ancient Egypt. Unlike the stoic, idealized representations of Pharaoh's past. Akhenaten and his family were depicted with elongated heads, protruding bellies, and spindly limbs. It's like Picasso got hold of a chisel and went to town. One theory posits that Akhenaten might have suffered from a genetic disorder, but let's not get too speculative here. What's clear is that these artistic choices were deliberate. Why the departure from the norm? Well, Akhenaten wasn't just revolutionizing religion. He was redefining what it meant to be divine. By depicting his family with these exaggerated features, he was breaking away from the traditional godlike image of pharaohs, presenting a more relatable, albeit oddly shaped, human image. It was an early attempt at PR, trying to connect with the common folk by showing vulnerability. But much like a modern politician trying to relate to the masses by awkwardly holding a baby for a photo op, it didn't quite hit the mark. Instead of endearing, it was just plain puzzling. Family life for Akhenaten wasn't all sunshine and Aten worship, though. He and Nefertiti had 6 daughters, and if you think managing a household of teenagers is challenging today, imagine doing it while running an empire and trying to reinvent the entire religious landscape. The daughters often appeared in artwork alongside their parents, part of a royal propaganda machine that emphasized the unity and divinity of the family. Yet, behind the scenes, the political dynamics were likely as complex as a soap opera plot twist. Akhenaten's focus on Aten meant that his family, too, became central figures in this new religious order, almost like high priests of a divine family cult. Nefertiti wasn't just a consort. She was often depicted performing religious rituals alongside Akhenaten, her role possibly even elevated to that of co-regent. She was the yin to his yang, the stabilizing force in a time of upheaval. Her presence in the political sphere was unprecedented, and it made waves in a society where women, while respected, were not typically seen wielding such overt power. But as with all good stories, there's a twist. Nefertiti's later years are shrouded in mystery. Around year 12 of Akhenaten's reign, she seems to vanish from the records. Theories abound. Did she fall out of favor? Was there a power struggle? Did she simply retire to a life of quiet reflection? The ancient equivalent of going off-grid. Whatever the reason, her disappearance left a void at a critical juncture in Akhenaten's reign, a time when the political landscape was as stable as a house of cards in a wind tunnel. Akhenaten's attempt to humanize his image through art was, in part, a political maneuver. By visually aligning himself with the everyday Egyptian, he was trying to bridge the gap between the divine and the mortal. But let's be real. There's only so much relatability you can achieve when you're living in a palace and claiming to be the mouthpiece of a god. The average Egyptian, toiling away under the hot sun, probably found it hard to relate to a pharaoh whose main concern seemed to be orchestrating sunlit worship festivals rather than addressing more earthly concerns like grain shortages or border skirmishes. This wasn't just a family affair. It was an empire-wide experiment in rebranding. And while Akhenaten's efforts were bold, they were also fraught with challenges. The economic strain of moving the capital, coupled with the societal upheaval of his religious reforms, created a tinderbox of tension. The nobles and priests who had lost their influence weren't exactly sending him thank-you notes, and the common folk, bewildered by the sudden shift from a pantheon of comforting deities to a singular, abstract god, probably felt like they'd been cast adrift on a sea of uncertainty. As Akhenaten's reign progressed, the political landscape grew increasingly unstable. His focus on Aten and the royal family as the embodiment of this new religious order left little room for the traditional power structures that had kept Egypt running smoothly for centuries. It was like trying to run a modern government without a legislative branch. Chaos was inevitable. While Akhenaten and Nefertiti's family dynamics were unique, they were also emblematic of the broader tensions at play. The intersection of family life and politics in Akhenaten's Egypt was a microcosm of the larger societal upheaval. The personal was political, and the political was deeply personal. Every decision, from the style of art to the city's architecture, is a reflection of Akhenaten's vision and his attempt to reshape the world in the image of Aten. And so, as the sun set over Akhenaten, the city stood not just as a testament to Akhenaten's religious fervor, but also as a monument to the complex web of family, politics, and ambition that defined his reign. It was a bold experiment, one that would leave ripples across history, challenging the very foundations of Egyptian society. Yet, as with all grand experiments, the question remained, could it withstand the test of time, or was it destined to crumble like the sand on which it was built? The answer, as always, lay in the unfolding chapters of history yet to be explored. As the sun continued its relentless journey across the sky above Akhenaten, the political landscape below was anything but serene. Akhenaten, once the golden child of religious revolution, was starting to feel the heat, not just from the sun, but from the simmering discontent that threatened to boil over at any moment. It turns out that when you upend millennia of tradition, not everyone throws a parade in your honor. Who knew? Let's dive into the backlash that Akhenaten faced, which was less of a gentle wave and more of a tsunami threatening to sweep away his sunlit dreams. His decision to pivot Egypt's religious compass towards Aten was akin to throwing a wrench into the well-oiled machine of Egyptian society. The priesthood, particularly the powerful Amun faction, wasn't exactly sending him thank-you notes. They were more likely drafting strongly worded scrolls and planning a hostile takeover, minus the boardroom and power suits, but with plenty of intrigue. The political instability that Akhenaten's reforms triggered was like a game of Jenga played on a windy day. Once you start pulling out the pieces that held the structure together, namely, the influence of the traditional priesthood, you better be ready for the whole thing to come crashing down. The priests of Amun had held onto power like a toddler clinging to a favorite toy, and Akhenaten's reforms were the equivalent of snatching it away. By sidelining them, he didn't just create enemies, he created a legion of disgruntled officials who had a vested interest in seeing him fail. And fail he did, at least on the foreign policy front. Under Akhenaten's reign, Egypt's borders were about as secure as a sieve. While he was busy building a city dedicated to Aten, the empire's outposts were left to fend for themselves. The Hittites up north and the Mitanni to the east were eyeing Egyptian territory like hawks, ready to swoop in at the first sign of weakness. Akhenaten's focus on religious reform left little room in his agenda for military strategy. His neglect of foreign affairs was akin to a captain steering his ship directly into a storm while rearranging the deck chairs. The administration of Egypt wasn't exactly a cakewalk, and Akhenaten's decision to prioritize his religious vision over statecraft was a gamble that didn't pay off. The empire's coffers, already stretched thin from the construction of Akhenaten, were further drained by the lack of tribute from foreign lands, which had previously bolstered the nation's wealth. The treasury was looking emptier than a pharaoh's tomb post-looting. Back home, the internal dissent was reaching critical mass. Akhenaten's reign had alienated many of the traditional power brokers, and the common people were caught in the crossfire. The economic mismanagement was palpable, with resources diverted to Akhenaten that could have fueled Egypt's infrastructure or supported its military. It was like trying to keep a luxury yacht afloat using duct tape and good intentions. Amidst this chaos, Akhenaten's reign grew increasingly isolated. His insistence on Aten as the sole deity had alienated not just the priests, but also the populace, who were accustomed to a pantheon of gods that offered comfort and familiarity. The old gods weren't just deities, they were woven into the daily lives of Egyptians. To suddenly have them replaced by a single, abstract concept was like replacing a cherished family recipe with a bland, generic dish. It didn't sit well with anyone. Now, let's address the myth that Akhenaten's downfall was due to divine disfavor. It's a romantic notion, the idea of a pharaoh's downfall being ordained by the gods, but the reality was far more mundane. The real culprit, economic mismanagement on a grand scale. Akhenaten's singular focus on religious reform meant that practical governance took a backseat. The empire's economy was like a car running on fumes with no gas station in sight. The lack of focus on agriculture, trade, and military defense left Egypt vulnerable, and the cracks in the empire's facade were starting to show. Despite the romantic allure of cosmic retribution, the truth was that Akhenaten's reign was doomed not by heavenly decree, but by the very earthly consequence of neglecting the fundamentals of statecraft. The economic strain was real, and the social fabric of Egypt was fraying. The backlash against Akhenaten wasn't just a reaction to his religious reforms. It was a response to the tangible hardships that his decisions had wrought. As Akhenaten's reign continued, the discontent grew louder. The nobles, once sidelined, began to reassert their influence, and whispers of rebellion echoed through the corridors of power. The once glorious city of Akhenaten, a monument to Akhenaten's vision, stood as a stark reminder of the costs of hubris. The backlash against his reforms was more than just a theological disagreement. It was a reckoning with the harsh realities of economic and political instability. So there you have it. The tale of Akhenaten's reign wasn't just about divine devotion or ideological zeal. It was a complex web of ambition, missteps, and the consequences of placing faith above pragmatism. His vision for Egypt was grand, but in neglecting the very foundations of governance, he sowed the seeds of his own downfall. As the sun continued to rise over Akhenaten, the cracks in its gleaming facade grew ever wider, setting the stage for a reckoning that would reverberate across the sands of time. As the sun set on Akhenaten's reign, the fallout from his religious upheaval was palpable, like the aftermath of a particularly rowdy party where you realize someone's taken your wallet and your dignity. When Akhenaten died around 1336 BC, he left behind a legacy that was as controversial as it was transformative. His son, Tutankhaten, soon to be known as Tutankhamun, was left to pick up the pieces of a kingdom in disarray, facing the monumental task of undoing his father's grand experiment. Tutankhamun, who ascended to the throne at the tender age of about 9, had about as much say in state affairs as a kid trying to command a room full of seasoned politicians. But that didn't stop his advisors from steering the ship back to familiar waters. The young king's first order of business, a rebranding campaign that would have put modern PR teams to shame. They changed his name from Tutankhaten to Tutankhamun, a symbolic gesture to restore the traditional religious order and signal the end of his father's Atenist experiment. It was the ancient equivalent of hitting Control-Z on the entire Ammon period. This retracing of steps was more than just cosmetic. Tutankhamun's advisors, likely led by the influential vizier Ai, moved the capital back to Thebes and reinstated the worship of Ammon, as if the whole Aten episode had been a collective fever dream. Temples dedicated to the old gods were reopened, and efforts were made to repair the damage done to the social and economic fabric of Egypt. The Ammon priesthood, once sidelined, was back at the helm, their influence restored like a phoenix rising from the ashes of Akhenaten. The erasure of Akhenaten's legacy wasn't limited to religious reform. In a series of moves that would make a reality show producer blush, Akhenaten's name and likeness were systematically chiseled out of monuments, replaced with those of more traditional figures. The Egyptians believed that to erase a name was to erase the memory of a person, effectively condemning them to oblivion. It was historical revisionism with a vengeance, as if Akhenaten had never existed. This attempt to delete him from the annals of history was so thorough that for centuries his story was lost to the sands of time. But history, much like a determined archaeologist with a pickaxe, has a way of unearthing buried truths. Fast forward to the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when archaeologists began piecing together the jigsaw puzzle of Akhenaten's reign. The discovery of the city of Ammon, Akhenaten's ancient avatar, and the art and inscriptions left behind shed light on this enigmatic pharaoh. Suddenly, Akhenaten was back in the spotlight, not as a heretic to be forgotten, but as a fascinating figure whose bold ideas, though flawed, left an indelible mark on history. Why does Akhenaten continue to captivate us today? Perhaps it's his audacity in the face of tradition, his willingness to question the status quo, or his visionary, if misguided, attempt to reshape the spiritual landscape. He was an iconoclast, a disruptor in a world that valued continuity over change. His story serves as a reminder of the perils and potential of challenging established norms, a tale as old as time, but as relevant as tomorrow's headlines. Iconoclasts like Akhenaten intrigue us because they embody the human drive to innovate and transform, even when their ideas crash and burn more spectacularly than a failed rocket launch. They remind us that progress often comes at a cost, that the path to enlightenment is littered with the debris of broken conventions and discarded beliefs. Akhenaten's legacy, though buried and forgotten for centuries, is a testament to the enduring allure of visionaries who dare to dream differently. In the end, Akhenaten's story is both a cautionary tale and a source of inspiration. His reign was a masterclass in the dangers of overreach and the importance of balance between innovation and tradition. The sun may have set on his dream of a monotheistic Egypt, but the ripples of his ambition continue to reach across the millennia, challenging us to reflect on the nature of power, faith, and the endless dance between change and continuity. So as you drift off to sleep, ponder this. In the grand tapestry of history, it's often the rebels and the radicals, the dreamers and the disruptors, who leave the most lasting impressions. Akhenaten may have been erased from his own time, but his legacy endures, a testament to the power of an idea, even one born from the blinding light of the sun god Aten. So you wake up on a chilly Scandinavian morning in the 10th century. Forget about the image of Vikings leaping out of bed, axes in hand, ready to conquer new lands. Nope, you're a Viking farmer, and your first battle of the day is with the cow that needs milking. Welcome to the not-so-glamorous side of Viking life, where farming, not pillaging, is the bread and butter, or should I say, the barley and rye. The sun's barely up, but you're already out of your woolen blankets. Like the epic sagas, your mornings don't start with heroic quests, but with the very unheroic task of shoveling manure. Before you start thinking you're in the wrong century, remember this. Vikings were more likely to wield a plow than a sword. In fact, evidence suggests that 90% of the population were farmers. Yeah, let that sink in. More pitchforks than battle axes. Your first stop is the animal shed, not a longship, where the livestock are waiting, not so patiently. Cows, sheep, and pigs outnumber warriors in your world. These animals are as critical to your survival as any raid across the seas. They provide milk, meat, and wool, and occasionally make you question your career choices when they refuse to cooperate. The cows need milking, and there's no Instagram filter to glamorize this task. By the way, a good cow gives about 2 gallons of milk a day. That's a lot of cheese potential right there. Next up, breakfast, but don't get too excited. Forget about feasting on roasted boar every morning. Today, you're having porridge made from barley or rye. Yum! Sure, Vikings had their share of feasts, but those were special occasions. Daily life, it's all about the grains. Barley and rye are the superstars of your diet. They're the crops that withstand the harsh Scandinavian climate, which, spoiler alert, isn't exactly Mediterranean. These grains are your bread and butter, quite literally. Bread made from barley or rye is a staple, providing the carbs you need to tackle a long day. After the animals are fed and breakfast is done, it's off to the fields. This is where you spend most of your day, plowing, sowing, harvesting, depending on the season. It's hard, back-breaking work, and it makes you appreciate the benefits of modern machinery. Remember, the Viking Age isn't just about raiding. Farming is a year-round commitment. The crops you grow are essential, not just for your family, but for trade. A good harvest could mean the difference between surviving the winter or not. Now, let's talk about economics. Being a Viking farmer isn't just about survival, it's also about making a living. Sure, raiding gets all the attention, but it's not the only economic activity. Farming is your bread and butter, but you're also part of a complex trade network. You might trade your surplus grain or livestock for goods you can't produce yourself, like salt or iron tools. Some of your neighbors might be off raiding, those lucky ducks, but someone's got to keep the home fires burning and the fields plowed right. But don't get it twisted. The raiding life isn't all it's cracked up to be either. Sure, there's the allure of treasure and adventure, but it's risky business. Not everyone comes back from a raid, and those who do often find their farms neglected. It's a tough balance. Farming might not offer the same thrills, but it's the more stable option. It's the backbone of Viking society, even if it doesn't make for epic poetry. As the day progresses, you've got to juggle a bunch of tasks, repairing tools, maintaining the farmstead, maybe even weaving or woodworking. Viking households were self-sufficient, which means you wear a lot of hats, and none of them are horned helmets. That's right, those iconic Viking helmets with horns. Complete myth. The only place you'll see those is in Wagnerian opera or a poorly researched Halloween costume. By evening, you're exhausted but satisfied. The day's work is done, and the evening meal awaits. Tonight's menu. Probably a stew made with whatever's available. It's not a feast, but it's nourishing and warm, which is all you can ask for after a long day. Around the fire, you might hear stories of past raids or tales of the gods, Odin, Thor, and the like. But these stories are entertainment, not a reflection of everyday life. The reality is most days are like today, full of toil, with moments of contentment and camaraderie. As you prepare for bed, the myth of the Viking warrior fades, replaced by the reality of the Viking farmer. It's not the stuff of legend, but it's the foundation of a society that left a lasting mark on history. So, as you drift off to sleep, remember, the true power of the Vikings lay not in their swords, but in their ability to cultivate and sustain a life in harsh conditions. Tomorrow's another day, and those crops aren't going to grow themselves. As you drift off to sleep, with dreams of bountiful harvests rather than glorious raids, let's turn the page to the mid-morning hustle and bustle of Viking farm life. So, it's mid-morning, and you're knee-deep in the daily grind. Forget the romantic notion of Vikings lounging around in grand halls all day. Instead, you're out here getting acquainted with the latest in 10th century agricultural technology. And by latest, I mean wooden plows and iron-tipped hoes. Yep, these are the cutting-edge tools of your trade. The wooden plow is a humble yet essential device, drawn by oxen, and it's your ticket to turning stubborn Scandinavian soil into something that might one day become dinner. Oh, and let's not forget the sickle, a small, crescent-shaped blade that's your best friend come harvest time. These tools might not have the same zing as a sword, but they're just as crucial for your survival. Now, let's talk architecture. Not the stuffy kind, with Corinthian columns and marble floors, but the kind that keeps you warm through those bone-chilling winters. Enter the Longhouse, your multi-purpose fortress against the elements. The Longhouse is as practical as it gets. Imagine a sturdy wooden frame, walls insulated with wattle and daub, a fancy term for sticks and mud, and a thatched roof. It's not exactly a five-star resort, but it's home. These longhouses are long for a reason. They need to accommodate your family, a few farmhands, and sometimes even livestock during the harshest months. It's like a Viking version of a studio apartment, only with more realistic chances of stepping in something unpleasant. Practical design extends to the barns, too. These are no mere outbuildings. They're carefully constructed to keep your grain dry and your animals safe from predators and the relentless Scandinavian weather. You see, every aspect of Viking architecture is about survival, not style points. Not that you'd mind a little style, but you've got bigger fish to fry, or in this case, bigger grains to thresh. Now, let's zoom out and talk about the bigger picture, the village. Viking society wasn't built on rugged individualism, despite what the Hollywood epics would have you believe. Your day-to-day life spins on the axis of community work and trade. Sure, there's a hierarchy in place, with chieftains at the top and thralls, or slaves, at the bottom, but it's not as rigid as you might think. Chieftains might have more land and livestock, but they rely on the labor of free farmers and thralls to keep things running smoothly. It's a delicate balance of power, like a Norse version of Game of Thrones, minus the dragons and gratuitous backstabbing. Trade, not isolation, is the lifeline of the village. Forget the image of Vikings as lone wolves. You're part of a complex web of trade routes, exchanging goods with neighboring villages and foreign lands. You might trade your surplus grain for iron tools or handcrafted items. Heck, even your neighbors across the North Sea, those Franks and Anglo-Saxons, are potential trading partners. It's a small world, after all. Viking trade networks are like the Amazon Prime of the medieval world, only without the 2-day delivery. Of course, it's not all sunshine and mead. The romanticized image of Vikings as free-spirited adventurers glosses over the harsh realities. Life in a Viking village is tough and often precarious. A bad harvest can spell disaster, and disease can sweep through a community with little warning. But it's this very struggle that forges a strong sense of camaraderie among villagers. You're all in this together, whether it's raising a barn or fending off the occasional raid from less-than-friendly neighbors. Speaking of raids, let's debunk yet another myth. While Vikings are often depicted as marauding warriors, the reality is more nuanced. Raiding is just one part of a much larger economic strategy. It's risky, uncertain, and not nearly as glamorous as it sounds. For every successful raid, there are countless others that end in failure or worse. Farming, on the other hand, offers stability, even if it doesn't make the history books. So, as you wrap up your mid-morning activities and take a moment to catch your breath, remember, the real story of the Vikings is one of resilience, community, and adaptability. It's not the stuff of sagas, but it's the foundation of a society that thrived against the odds. And while you might not be wielding a sword or sailing the high seas, your role as a farmer is just as vital to the Viking legacy. Hang tight, because there's more to uncover in this saga of everyday life. As you wrap up the morning's chores and head back to the longhouse, it's time to tackle another critical aspect of Viking life, the midday meal. And, spoiler alert, if you're expecting a table groaning under the weight of roast meats and overflowing goblets of mead, you're in for a surprise. Viking farmers like you had a diet grounded in practicality and the whims of Scandinavian seasons, not epic feasts fit for Valhalla. Let's start by debunking the meat myth. Sure, Vikings ate meat, but it wasn't the everyday staple it's often made out to be. Livestock like cows and sheep were valuable commodities more useful for their milk and wool than as banquet centerpieces. Think of meat as the medieval equivalent of a nice bottle of wine, saved for special occasions unless you're really trying to impress the neighbors. When you do eat meat, it's usually pork, and it's not because you're a bacon enthusiast. Pigs are the livestock equivalent of a 2-for-1 deal. They're easy to raise and don't require as much pasture as cattle. Speaking of pasture, let's talk about what actually fills your plate most days: grains and vegetables. Barley, rye, and oats are the real MVPs here. These grains are your dietary backbone, showing up in everything from bread to porridge to ale. And yes, ale counts as a food group. Why? Because the water quality isn't always top-notch, and a low-alcohol brew is safer to drink. Archaeological digs have unearthed remnants of these grains in Viking settlements, revealing that even back then, carbs were life. So next time someone tells you Vikings were all about meat, remember, they were carb-loading long before it was cool. Now, about those vegetables. Your garden might not be bursting with variety, but it's got the essentials. Think cabbages, onions, and peas. Less a rainbow of produce, more a 50 shades of green scenario. These veggies are hardy enough to withstand the Scandinavian climate, and they're a staple in your diet. Onions, for example, are the secret weapon in your culinary arsenal, adding flavor to otherwise bland dishes. And if you're lucky, you might have some herbs like dill or caraway to spice things up. A little sprinkle of dill on your fish stew is the closest thing you'll get to gourmet cuisine. But wait, there's more to the Viking diet than just what's fresh. Enter the world of preserved foods. A necessity when your growing season is shorter than a Scandinavian summer. Preservation is your insurance policy against the long, harsh winters. You're talking about drying, smoking, and fermenting. Fish are dried or smoked, meats are salted, and dairy is turned into cheese or skyr, a yogurt-like product that's both a source of nutrition and a testament to your ancestors' lactose tolerance. And let's not forget fermentation, because what's a Viking meal without a little pickled herring? It's an acquired taste, sure, but it's also a smart way to keep food edible when the earth is frozen solid. Archaeologists have found evidence of fermentation pits and storage jars, showing that Vikings were the original food preservationists. These methods weren't just about survival. They were a form of culinary innovation in an era that didn't have the luxury of refrigeration. Now, let's talk about the kitchen. Forget about sleek countertops and stainless steel appliances. Your kitchen tools are more Flintstone than Jetson. You're working with clay parts, wooden utensils, and a hearth that serves as your stove, oven, and central heating system all rolled into one. Cooking is a communal activity, and the hearth is the heart of your home. It's where meals are prepared, stories are shared, and warmth is found on cold nights. The tools might be simple, but they're effective. Clay pots, for instance, are excellent for slow-cooking stews, a staple meal when you need to feed a family on a budget of time and resources. While we're on the subject, let's address another misconception, that Viking meals were monotonous affairs. Sure, variety might not be the spice of life here, but seasonality ensures that your diet changes throughout the year. In summer, you might indulge in fresh berries and herbs, while winter sees you relying more on preserved goods. It's a cyclical pattern that connects you to the land and its rhythms, a far cry from the grocery store convenience we take for granted today. Economic savvy comes into play too. You're part of a larger trade network, remember. That means you have access to foods not native to your region, like honey and salt, which are traded for your surplus goods. Salt, in particular, is worth its weight in gold, or at least silver, because it's essential for preserving food. Imagine curing a leg of pork without it. You can't, can you? Salt is the unsung hero of your pantry, and trade ensures you have enough to keep those winter supplies well stocked. So, as you sit down to your midday meal, you're not just eating. You're participating in a tradition that's as much about survival as it is about community and culture. The Viking diet is a testament to ingenuity and adaptability, qualities that have allowed your people to thrive in a land that's as challenging as it is beautiful. The next time you hear someone wax poetic about Viking feasts, you can chuckle to yourself knowing the real story. It's not about the grandeur of the meal, but the grit of getting it to the table. And with that, you're ready to tackle the afternoon, fueled by a diet that's as hardy as the people who consume it. Now, time to get back to the fields, because those crops aren't going to tend themselves, and the sun waits for no Viking. Keep your wits about you. There's still more to uncover in the complex tapestry of Viking life. As you head back to the fields, with the sun still high enough to remind you that day's far from over, let's pivot from the nitty-gritty of farm life to a different kind of fieldwork. The political landscape of Viking society. Bet you didn't think you'd need a degree in political science to be a farmer, huh? But welcome to the Viking Age, where your plow may break the soil, but it's the thing that breaks disputes. The thing, you see, isn't some monster from a horror flick, but the local assembly where decisions that shape your life are made. Think of it as a mix between a town hall meeting, a courtroom, and a medieval version of a TED talk, minus the PowerPoints and motivational quotes. Here, the free men of the community gather to discuss issues, resolve disputes, and even pass laws. It's grassroots democracy, Viking style, where every farmer has a voice, even if it's occasionally drowned out by the village loudmouth. Now, let's bust a myth before it takes root. Vikings as anarchic marauders with no regard for order. In reality, they had a complex legal system with codes as detailed as the latest IKEA manual. The thing was the beating heart of this system, and it was no small potatoes. It wielded significant power, from settling land disputes to deciding punishments for everything from theft to more colorful crimes like cattle rustling. And believe it or not, these assemblies were quite egalitarian for their time. A farmer might find himself standing shoulder to shoulder with a chieftain, both with equal say, assuming, of course, that they were free men. Thralls or slaves unfortunately didn't get a ticket to this political shindig. And what's on the docket today at the Thing? Perhaps a land dispute between neighbors. Land ownership was a big deal, as crucial as your ability to milk a cow without getting kicked. Land wasn't just a plot of earth. It was your life insurance, your retirement plan, and your legacy, all rolled into one muddy package. But land could also be a source of tension. With no Google Maps to outline property lines, arguments over boundaries were as common as rainy days in Scandinavia. The Thing had the unenviable job of sorting these out, often relying on witnesses and the memory of the oldest person in the village, because nothing says reliable like a 90-year-old's recollection of events from decades past. The Thing didn't just handle local squabbles, though. It also had a hand in shaping broader societal norms. Viking laws, recorded in texts like the Gulathing and Frostathing law codes, reveal a society that valued compensation and reconciliation over outright vengeance. For instance, if someone in your family was wronged, you might receive weregild, a form of monetary compensation, to settle the score. It was an early form of restorative justice designed to keep the peace in a society where grudges could easily escalate into blood feuds. It's like getting a gift card for having your honor besmirched. But let's not romanticize it too much. Viking justice was harsh by today's standards. Serious crimes could result in outlawry, a fate worse than death for many. An outlaw was essentially a person with a one-way ticket to nowhere, stripped of legal protection and fair game for anyone who fancied a bit of vigilantism. It was a brutal system, yes, but one that was designed to maintain order in a world where the nearest police officer was several centuries away. Now, about those societal norms. They were as complex as a saga, with roles and responsibilities clearly defined, yet surprisingly flexible. Sure, there were chieftains and thralls, but social mobility was possible, albeit limited. A thrall could earn his freedom. A free man could rise to become a chieftain if fortune smiled his way. A reminder that even in a hierarchical society, the winds of change could blow in unexpected directions. Gender roles, too, were more nuanced than you might think. Women had a surprising amount of agency, managing households, and even wielding power in the absence of their menfolk. Some historical accounts suggest they could initiate divorce and own property. So much for the damsel in distress trope. The thing was also a social event, a chance to catch up on the latest gossip or trade a few goods while you were at it. It was the ancient equivalent of checking your social media feed, only with more actual socializing and fewer cat memes. Plus, it was a place where alliances were forged and friendships tested, often over a shared mug of ale. And let's not forget the storytelling, an oral tradition that kept history alive long before anyone thought to jot it down on vellum. So, as you participate in the thing, you're not just engaging in political theater. You're part of a living tapestry that binds your community together. It's a system that balances law and order with the chaos of human nature, where justice is administered with a heavy dose of pragmatism. It's not perfect, but it's a testament to the Viking spirit of resilience and adaptability. And who knows, maybe one day, tales of this assembly will echo through the ages, reminding future generations that the Vikings were more than just the sum of their battles and raids. With the thing wrapping up, it's time to head back to the farmstead. But don't get too comfortable. The sun may be setting, but there's still work to be done, and the story of Viking life is far from over. Tomorrow brings new challenges, and perhaps a chance to delve deeper into the intricate web of trade and diplomacy that stretched far beyond your village. The saga continues, so keep those ears open and that plow ready. As you make your way back to the farmstead, the sun dips behind the Scandinavian horizon, casting long shadows over the fields you've toiled in all day. Evening is the Viking farmer's version of happy hour, minus the half-price cocktails and awkward small talk. It's a time when you can finally hang up your farmer's hat. Figuratively, of course, since hats were more of a winter necessity than a fashion statement, and unwind with some good old-fashioned leisure activities. First up on the agenda is the evening meal, and no, it's not a Viking banquet with overflowing platters and bards reciting epic sagas. Tonight, you're more likely enjoying a humble stew, simmering in that trusty clay pot over the hearth. It's a medley of whatever's left in the pantry. Some barley, a few carrots, perhaps a bit of smoked fish if you're lucky. While it might not be Michelin-starred cuisine, it's hearty and fills the belly, essential after a hard day's work. Once the meal is over and the dishes have been set aside, because who needs a dishwasher when you have a stream nearby? It's time for storytelling. Ah, the Viking storytelling tradition, where the line between history and myth is as blurred as a watercolor painting left out in the rain. Gathered around the fire, you might hear tales of Odin, Thor, and Loki, gods whose exploits are as colorful as they are cautionary. These stories serve a dual purpose. They entertain and educate, passing down cultural values and moral lessons to the younger generation. It's like a Netflix binge, but with more imagination and fewer screen-induced headaches. Now, let's debunk the myth that Viking stories were solely about battle and conquest. Sure, there were plenty of those, but the sagas also explored themes of love, betrayal, and even humor. Yes, Vikings had a sense of humor, believe it or not. The sagas are filled with clever wordplay and riddles that would make even the most stoic warrior crack a smile. They're a testament to the rich oral tradition that kept Viking culture alive long before someone thought to put quill to parchment. But storytelling isn't the only way to pass the evening. There's also crafting, an essential skill when you live in a world where Amazon Prime isn't a thing. Whether it's weaving, wood carving, or metalwork, crafting is both a necessity and an art form. Viking textiles, for instance, are more than just functional. They're woven with intricate patterns that reflect the wearer's social status and community ties. Archaeological finds have unearthed woven fragments featuring complex designs, evidence of a craftsmanship that rivals anything you'd find in a modern fashion house. And then there's metalwork, where artisans transform raw iron into tools, weapons, and jewelry with a finesse that would make even a modern blacksmith nod in approval. The intricacies of Viking art, found on everything from brooches to longship bows, are a mark of a society that valued both form and function. It's art with an edge, literally, in the case of those famously ornate swords. Evening leisure on the farm also offers a chance for reflection. Away from the day's demands, you ponder the balance between the hardships of Viking life and its enduring legacy. It's easy to romanticize the past, to get swept up in the allure of adventure and heroism. But let's face it, life in the Viking Age was about as glamorous as a muddy boot. The reality is that daily life was a grind, full of challenges, that would test the mettle of even the toughest modern survivalist. Yet, it's this very struggle that created a society resilient enough to leave a lasting mark on history. The Vikings weren't just marauders or farmers. They were explorers, traders, and settlers, building a network that stretched from North America to the Middle East. Their legacy is more than the sum of their conquests. It's the cultural and economic connections they forged, the stories they told, and the innovations they left behind. And while we're myth-busting, let's tackle the image of the Viking warrior. Sure, those raids were part of life, but they were also a gamble, a high-stakes game where the odds were often against you. The real strength of Viking society lay in its ability to adapt and thrive in a harsh environment. It's a legacy of endurance, of carving out a life in a land that offered more challenges than comforts. As the fire dims and you prepare to call it a night, you realize that the story of the Vikings isn't just about their past. It's about how they continue to capture our imagination. They were a society that balanced the harsh realities of their world with a rich tapestry of culture and community. And perhaps that's why their legacy endures, not because of the battles they fought, but because of the lives they built. Tomorrow, the sun will rise, and you'll take up your tasks once more. But for now, you can rest easy, knowing that you're part of a history that's as much about resilience and innovation as it is about adventure and myth. And as you drift off to sleep, you carry with you the echoes of a bygone era, a reminder that history is not just a series of events, but a collection of stories waiting to be told. The morning air is cool, and the first sounds you're greeted with are not the chirping of birds, but the rhythmic clatter of looms. Welcome to an average day in ancient Greece, where weaving isn't just an activity, it's practically the soundtrack of life. You roll out of bed as the sun peaks over the horizon, and the looms have already started their symphony. By the gods, these folks are early risers. In ancient Greece, weaving was as central to life as olive oil and wine. Forget visions of leisurely afternoons with a casual hobby. This was an industrious affair that occupied the hands and minds of women across the land. We're talking economic backbone levels of importance here. The warp-weighted loom is your apparatus of choice, towering at about 2 meters high. It's not exactly a subtle piece of furniture. It takes up a significant chunk of your living space. But hey, when your entire household's clothing and some trade goods depend on this beast, it earns its spot. Let's not romanticize this too much, though. The loom isn't a magical contraption that hums and weaves on its own. It demands your full attention, skill, and a good chunk of your day. You stand, weaving back and forth, your hands a blur of motion. The warp threads are pulled taut by weights, usually stones or clay discs, keeping them vertical and ready for you to pass the weft thread through. It's a constant dance between your body and the loom, a repetitive routine that's oddly soothing once you get in the groove. But why is weaving such a big deal? Well, in a world without Zara or H&M, every piece of cloth counts. Households rely on the women to produce textiles, not just for clothing, but also as valuable trade items. We're talking about economic clout, baby. A well-woven piece of fabric wasn't just a necessity. It was a sign of a household's prosperity and competence. And let's not forget, in city-states like Athens, weaving was essentially a social activity. Women gathered in groups, sharing gossip and advice as their fingers worked the threads. It's the ancient Greek version of a knitting circle, only with a bit more at stake. Now, let's talk materials. Wool and flax are your primary candidates, each with their own fan club and set of challenges. Wool, sourced from sheep, is the staple. It's warm, versatile, and dyes beautifully. But it's not just about shearing a sheep and calling it a day. The wool needs to be washed, carded, and spun into thread, a process that takes time and skill. Flax, on the other hand, gives you linen, which is lighter and more breathable, perfect for those sweltering Mediterranean summers. But growing flax is no walk in the agora. It involves planting, harvesting, and then a process called redding, where the stalks are essentially left to rot in water, separating the fibers from the woody core. Smells as delightful as it sounds. The ancient Greeks had a knack for using what was available in their environment, and these textiles reflect that sustainable mindset. Wool from sheep raised on local pastures, flax grown in Mediterranean soil. They understood their resources and worked with them, creating textiles that were practical and suited to their climate. It's a lesson in resourcefulness that's as relevant today as it was then. You might be wondering why weaving fell predominantly to women. The romantic version is that it allowed them artistic expression and social interaction. The practical version, it was labor-intensive, home-based work that fit into the patriarchal structure of Greek society. Men were off philosophizing, politicking, or waging wars, while women managed the household, and weaving was a substantial part of that management. It's a reminder that historical gender roles were as much about practicality as they were about oppression. By now, the morning is well underway, and the rhythmic clack of the loom has settled into the background of your day. Every pass of the shuttle is a thread in the tapestry of daily life, each piece of fabric a testament to skill, patience, and the relentless drive of necessity. Weaving in ancient Greece wasn't just about making cloth. It was about weaving the fabric of society itself. The sun climbs higher, and the loom continues its steady clatter, a constant reminder of the enduring legacy of those who wove before you. Each thread is a connection to the past, a story spun into the very fabric of history. And as you continue with your day, the loom is always there, waiting for its next cue in the unending dance of warp and weft. As the sun climbs higher, casting its golden rays over the bustling households of ancient Greece, the loom is more than just a tool. It's practically a family member. It's the matriarch of the domestic sphere, demanding attention, respect, and the occasional curse when threads tangle. But whether you're a young girl learning the ropes or a seasoned matron with fingers that move like lightning, weaving is an art that ties you to your identity. And oh boy, the expectations are high. Let's dive into the mythological waters and question Penelope, that paragon of wifely virtue from Homer's The Odyssey. Ah, Penelope, weaving by day and unraveling by night, a classic tale of female cunning if there ever was one. But here's a curveball. Was she really the epitome of domestic virtue, or was she trapped in a narrative spun by societal expectations? Weaving, for Penelope, wasn't just about creating fabric. It was a strategic maneuver, stalling tactic that allowed her to maintain control in a world where women had about as much power as a threadbare toga. Remember, this was a time when the most significant female power play was keeping suitors at bay with a loom and some clever deception. In reality, weaving was synonymous with female identity. It was a badge of honor and a measure of a woman's worth. Ladies, if you weren't a whiz at the loom, you might as well have been trying to sell ice to Spartans. Your reputation, your family status, your very virtue were wound up in those threads. A well-crafted piece of cloth was more than just a garment. It was a declaration of diligence and skill. Weaving wasn't just work. It was a daily affirmation of your place in society. The Romans later borrowed this cultural motif, but let's face it, they borrowed everything else too, so why not? Now, let's debunk the notion that weaving was a solo gig. Sure, you might picture a lone woman, stoically looming in the corner like a textile version of the thinker. But don't be fooled, this was a team sport. Picture this, the main weaver at her station, perhaps a daughter at her side, learning the family trade, while younger children scamper about, helping with simpler tasks like spinning or carding wool. It was a family affair, a domestic symphony where everyone played their part. Even hired help could get in on the action, though they were likely more interested in getting paid than perfecting their loom technique. And let's not forget the economic underpinnings of this whole operation. Weaving was no mere pastime. It was an economic necessity. In an age long before industrialized looms and fast fashion, textiles were a substantial part of household wealth. The products of your loom could be swapped at the agora for olive oil, wine, or that must have imported Egyptian linen that everyone was raving about. If your household was a bit more affluent, you might even weave for export, sending your handiwork across the Mediterranean to flaunt at far-flung markets. But let's touch on the less glamorous side of this narrative. While weaving was integral to daily life and social structure, it was also a relentless grind. The romanticized image of the noble weaver fades when you consider the back-breaking labor, the sore fingers, and the eye strain from hours spent squinting at intricate patterns. There was no such thing as a work-life balance. The loom was life. And if you think work-from-home policies are a 21st century invention, think again. Women were expected to manage the household and weave, all without the luxury of Zoom meetings or coffee breaks. In the broader scheme, weaving also reflected the societal hierarchies and divisions of labor. While women were the primary workforce behind the loom, men were often involved in the trade and sale of textiles. This division of labor mirrored the wider gender roles of the time, where men were the public face of commerce, and women were the backbone, weaving away in the shadows. It's a dynamic that's eerily persistent across history, proving that while the threads may change, the weave remains surprisingly familiar. As the sun reaches its zenith, the rhythmic clatter of looms continues unabated, a testament to the enduring legacy of those ancient weavers. Each thread tells a story, not just of domestic life, but of societal structure, economic necessity, and the unyielding expectations placed on women. So, next time you eye that cozy sweater or breezy linen shirt, spare a thought for the ancient artisans who crafted their world one thread at a time. They weren't just weaving cloth, they were weaving the very fabric of their society. As the sun reaches its zenith, and the looms keep their steady beat, let's take a breather to dive into the economics of ancient Greek textiles. Because, my friend, these woven goods were the Bitcoin of their day, minus the environmental impact. Textiles weren't just draped over shoulders, they were draped over economies. Picture this. You're in Athens, and your woven goods are harder than the Parthenon on a summer's day. In a world where coins were sometimes scarce, textiles often served as currency. Imagine handing over a finely woven chiton to settle a debt, or trade for a handful of figs. Talk about wearing your wealth on your sleeve, or tunic, in this case. A well-crafted piece of cloth was like walking around with a stack of drachmas, only softer and a bit more breathable. But let's talk numbers, because who doesn't love a good data point? A single piece of quality textile could fetch the equivalent of 1 to 2 weeks' wages for an average Greek laborer. That's a substantial chunk of change when you consider that the daily wage in 5th century BCE Athens was about 1 drachma. It's like swapping a shirt for an iPhone in today's terms. So, if your household was efficient at the loom, you weren't just clothed, you were cash-rich in the ancient sense. Now, let's not get carried away with romantic visions of riches pouring in like a Greek tragedy with a happy ending. Weaving was labor-intensive, and the costs added up faster than you could say Athena's Aegis. You needed raw materials, wool or flax, which had their own market prices. Carding and spinning the wool or redding the flax were time-consuming, laborious processes done mostly by women who, let's face it, weren't exactly pulling CEO salaries. Plus, you had to account for tools, maintenance, and the occasional mishap when the loom decided to tangle your threads in an art of Olympian complexity. When you factor in these costs, the profit margins were tighter than a Spartan warrior's abs. But this wasn't just about individual households chasing a drachma. It was about an entire economic ecosystem. Greek textiles were a commodity in a bustling Mediterranean trade network, connecting city-states like Athens, Corinth, and Sparta to faraway places like Egypt, Phoenicia, and beyond. These threads of trade wove a complex tapestry of cultural and economic exchange. Greek fabrics were sought after for their quality and craftsmanship, making them a staple in international markets. Now, let's put this in perspective compared to other professions. Being a weaver wasn't quite the rock star lifestyle of a philosopher or the glory-chasing gig of a soldier. It was steadier than relying on the whims of the gods for a good harvest. You could argue that weaving was the ancient equivalent of being in tech, an industry that's always in demand, a bit repetitive, and occasionally involves debugging, or, in this case, detangling. Let's not forget the darker threads in this tapestry. Weaving as an economic activity also reflected the gender division of labor. Women were the weavers, not by choice, but by societal expectation. Meanwhile, men handled the trade and sale of these textiles, navigating the public sphere while women toiled in the domestic shadows. The economic power these textiles represented was often wielded by men, even though it was women who spun the very foundation of this wealth. It's a classic tale of uncredited labor, one as old as the myths themselves. The Mediterranean trade routes were the ancient Silk Roads of their time, bustling with activity. Greek textiles made their way across the sea, exchanged for goods like Egyptian papyrus, Persian spices, and Anatolian tin. This network wasn't a simple point-A-to-point B journey. It was a complex web of interactions, with Greek textiles playing a starring role. The export of these textiles contributed to the prosperity of Greek city-states, bolstering their economies and allowing them to invest in those grandiose temples and public works we admire today. As you can see, weaving was more than just a domestic chore. It was a cog in the vast machinery of ancient commerce. The economic implications of weaving were immense. shaping not only household economies, but entire city-states and their interactions with the wider world. So, next time you slip into a cozy fabric, think of the ancient weavers who spun not just cloth, but the very fabric of economic life in their time. And as the afternoon sun casts long shadows, the looms keep their rhythm, much like the relentless march of time itself. Each thread holds a story of trade, toil, and transformation, a testament to the enduring nature of human enterprise. We're not done yet, though. There's more to untangle as we continue to weave through history. And as we weave onward into the evening, let's unravel how weaving in ancient Greece was far more than mere textile creation. It was a political and cultural powerhouse. If you've ever thought of weaving as a quaint pastime, brace yourself for a reality check. This craft was a thread that stitched together the very identity of Greek society, and it played a starring role in art, mythology, and politics. First, let's tackle the art and mythology front. Imagine walking through ancient Athens and catching sight of a vase depicting Athena, the goddess of wisdom, war, and, you guessed it, weaving. Her gig as the patron deity of spinners and weavers wasn't just a divine hobby. It was a political statement. Athena's association with weaving symbolized the city's cultural sophistication and industrious spirit. Forget the romanticized notion of goddesses lounging in the clouds. Athena was a working deity, embodying the blend of intellect and labor that defined the Athenian ideal. In mythology, weaving often served as a metaphor for fate and destiny. Take the Moirai, the three fates who wove, measured, and cut the threads of life itself. Talk about controlling the narrative. These mythological weavers were the ultimate power brokers, deciding the fate of gods and mortals alike. It's a nice reminder that, while you might be weaving a simple chiton, somewhere in the heavens, your thread was part of a larger cosmic tapestry. Now, let's debunk the idea that weaving was just a cozy artistic endeavor. Sure, it had its artistic flair, but it was also a vehicle for political propaganda. Take the Parthenon frieze, for example, a masterpiece of marble that also happens to showcase the Panathenaic procession. You see, the Panathenaea was a festival where a woven peplos was presented to Athena, a ritual steeped in political symbolism. This wasn't just about dressing up a statue. It was a public spectacle that reinforced civic pride and political unity. The intricate patterns on that peplos were essentially a woven manifesto, declaring Athens as the cultural and political heart of Greece. Aristotle, never one to miss a chance to philosophize, had quite a bit to say about weaving. In his works, he used the metaphor of weaving to discuss the virtues of a good citizen. According to him, just as a skilled weaver interlaces threads to create a harmonious fabric, so should a citizen contribute to the harmonious functioning of the state. This wasn't just a casual comparison. It was a deliberate attempt to link the domestic art of weaving with the larger political and social order. Aristotle, ever the pragmatist, understood that a well-woven society required both individual skill and collective effort. And let's not forget the role of weaving in reinforcing societal norms. The act of weaving was loaded with symbolic meanings, patience, diligence, and the quiet strength of the domestic sphere. These were the virtues expected of women, and weaving was a constant, tangible reminder of those expectations. Yet within this structured framework, women wielded their own power. The myth of Iraq, the talented mortal weaver who dared to challenge Athena, serves as a cautionary tale about pride and punishment. But it also highlights the skill and creativity that women could possess, even if society wasn't quite ready to acknowledge it. Weaving also played its part in the grand tapestry of Greek political life. During times of conflict, such as the Peloponnesian War, the production of textiles could be disrupted by the shifting demands of war. Men marched off to battle, while women continued to weave, maintaining the economic and social fabric even as the world around them unraveled. Textiles became both a symbol of stability and a resource for war efforts, as cloaks and tunics were needed for soldiers. The loom was both a domestic anchor and a quiet participant in the political machinations of the time. On a broader scale, weaving was a reflection of Greek identity itself. To an outsider, Greek textiles were a testament to the creativity and skill of the Hellenic world. They were a soft power, a way to project cultural superiority without the need for swords or spears. In the competitive arena of ancient geopolitics, Even something as humble as a piece of cloth could carry significant weight. As the day fades into evening and the shadows lengthen, weaving continues its steady rhythm, a constant chorus against the backdrop of Greek life. It's a reminder that while individual threads may seem insignificant, together they form a complex, beautiful tapestry. This is the story of weaving in ancient Greece, a tale of art, politics, and identity woven into the very fabric of history itself. And with that, we leave some threads hanging for the next chapter in this journey through time. As the sun dips behind the horizon and the evening hums with the quieting sounds of a world unwinding, it's time to reflect on the enduring legacy of weaving in ancient Greece, a craft that spun the very threads of society. It's easy to romanticize a past filled with nimble fingers and rhythmic looms, but let's unravel the truth of it. Weaving was the unsung hero of an entire civilization. First, let's tug on the economic thread. Weaving wasn't just a household chore, it was an economic powerhouse. In a world where the concept of a day job was as alien as an alien invasion, weaving kept the gears of the ancient economy turning. It was the OG gig economy. The clatter of looms wasn't just a domestic melody. It was the sound of money being spun out of thin air, or more accurately, out of wool and flax. In Athens, for instance, a well-crafted garment could be as valuable as a week's wages, meaning those threads weren't just holding fabric together. They were holding entire households afloat. But this isn't just about drachmas and togas. Weaving helped stitch together the social fabric of Greek life. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a social network, without the trolls and clickbait. Women gathered in groups to weave, sharing stories, advice, and the occasional complaint about the state of their husbands' philosophical musings. This communal aspect wasn't just about companionship. It was a vital exchange of knowledge and culture. These gatherings were the salons of their day, where the real business of life was woven amid the warp and weft. Now, let's untangle the myth from the reality. The image of Penelope, weaving her cunning web to fend off suitors, is a tale as old as time. But while it's tempting to see weaving solely as a symbol of female cunning and artistic expression, the reality was a bit more, well, grounded. Weaving was labor. It was work, plain and simple, often done out of necessity rather than choice. The loom was less a tool of empowerment and more a symbol of duty. Yet, it was within this framework of expectation that women found their agency. In a society that saw women as secondary, weaving was a space where they could excel, contribute, and yes, occasionally outsmart the menfolk. Politically, weaving had its own subtle power. It wasn't just cloth that was woven. Identities were crafted too. The Greeks were masters of using textiles as symbols of civic pride and political statements. The Panathenaic peplos, presented to Athena, wasn't just a religious offering. It was a woven flag of Athenian supremacy. It declared to all who saw it that Athens was not just a city of thinkers and warriors, but of skilled artisans. This wasn't merely about adorning a statue. It was about adorning the city's status on the world stage. And as much as we like to think we've moved on from these ancient threads, the reality is that weaving still has a hold on the modern world. Fast forward to today, and you'll find that textiles remain a staple of global trade. The fashion industry is a multi-billion-dollar behemoth, with its roots firmly planted in those ancient looms. Sure, we have machines now, but the principles remain the same, transforming raw materials into something both functional and beautiful. It's a legacy that has stood the test of time, proving that while styles may change, the essence of weaving is eternal. In a broader sense, weaving is a perfect metaphor for human history itself. It's a reminder that even the smallest, most mundane acts can have a ripple effect across time and space. Each thread, each piece of fabric, tells a story of human ingenuity, resilience, and adaptation. It's a testament to the fact that history isn't just written by the victors or the philosophers. It's woven by those who toil daily, often unnoticed, yet crucially important. So, as the final threads of this day unravel, we see that weaving was more than just an ancient art. It was a fundamental part of the Greek legacy. It shaped economies, defined social structures, and even contributed to political life. It was both the canvas and the paint, the loom and the thread, in the grand tapestry of history. And while the looms may have stopped clattering in ancient times, their echo continues to resonate, reminding us of the enduring power of those simple, everyday acts that together weave the fabric of our world. The year is 1046 BCE, and ancient China is a landscape where power is as fragile as a porcelain vase. The Shang Dynasty, with its impressive track record of ruling since around 1600 BCE, seems invincible on the surface. But look a little closer, and you'll see cracks forming. You've got a society where the king's word is law, and the laws are as capricious as a teenager's TikTok trends. The Shang kings, with names like Wu Ding and Dai Xin, have built their empires on bronze, oracle bones, and a fair bit of intimidation, which is a top-notch strategy until someone decides they've had enough of being bullied. Enter the Zhou, a clan chilling in the western regions, eyeing the Shang's shiny throne like a board executive in a boardroom meeting, plotting to swipe the CEO's chair. The Zhou are led by the legendary King Wen, and eventually his son King Wu, who aren't just playing the long game, they're playing 4D chess while everyone else is fiddling with checkers. King Wen, with a reputation for being a sage and a bit of a smooth operator, starts laying the groundwork by winning over neighboring tribes. It's like the ultimate networking event, but with more horses and less small talk about the weather. The socio-political dynamics of the time were a bit like a reality TV show where everyone's vying for the ultimate prize of power and influence. The Shang had become complacent, ruling over their territories with the assumption that nobody would dare ruffle their feathers. But complacency is a dangerous dance partner, and the Zhou were learning all the moves. The Shang Dynasty, known for its elaborate ritual practices and ancestor worship, relied heavily on these traditions to maintain their grip on power. They believed their ancestors had their back, but as it turns out, celestial support doesn't always translate into terrestrial success. Economically, the Shang were the big dogs, controlling vast tracts of fertile land along the Yellow River. This was prime real estate, the kind you'd see featured on an ancient version of House Hunters. Their economy was heavily reliant on agriculture, with millet and wheat being the crops du jour. The Shang also had a penchant for bronze, churning out weapons and ritual vessels that were the envy of their neighbors. This metal wasn't just for show, it was their ticket to military supremacy. But even the sturdiest bronze can't prevent a coup if the troops start asking why they're following orders from a king more interested in partying than policy. And so, the stage is set for the Zhou to make their move. They're like the startup company that's been quietly developing a killer app, waiting for the right moment to disrupt the market. The Zhou had their own resources, nestled in the Wai River Valley, which was rich in natural resources and strategically located. It was the Silicon Valley of ancient China, minus the tech bros and overpriced coffee. The Zhou knew that timing was everything. They watched as King Dai Xin of the Shang alienated his allies and indulged in luxuries that would make the Kardashians blush. His mismanagement became the Zhou's opportunity. The Zhou's rise wasn't just a result of a few smart moves. It was a perfect storm of economic savvy, political acumen, and a little bit of luck. They understood the power of alliances, the importance of a strong military, and the value of a good narrative. King Wen and King Wu crafted a story of moral superiority, painting the Shang as the villains in a tale where the Zhou were the righteous heroes. It's a classic underdog story with all the elements of a blockbuster hit, except with more chariots and less CGI. As the Zhou began to challenge the Shang, they did so with a clear understanding of the socio-political landscape. They knew that to overthrow a dynasty, you couldn't just have a strong army, you needed the support of the people. They positioned themselves as liberators, promising a new era of peace and prosperity. And who doesn't love a good promise of peace and prosperity? It was the kind of rhetoric that resonated with those who were tired of the Shang's heavy-handed rule. In this ancient game of thrones, the Zhou were the ultimate strategists, knowing when to strike and when to bide their time. They were aware that the Shang's strength was also their weakness, a reliance on tradition and hierarchy that left little room for innovation or dissent. The Zhou capitalized on this by presenting themselves as the forward-thinking alternative, ready to usher in a new age. Their ambition was as vast as the lands they sought to control, and they weren't about to let the opportunity slip away. So here we are, at the cusp of a monumental shift in history. The Zhou, with their strategic brilliance and knack for timing, are ready to challenge the status quo. The Shang, once a formidable force, now stand as a cautionary tale of what happens when power goes unchecked. It's a story of rebellion, ambition, and the realization that even the mightiest dynasties can fall. The Zhou were about to change the course of history, and nothing, not even the weight of centuries-old tradition, could stand in their way. As the Zhou set their sights on the throne, the stage was perfectly set for the grand drama of the Battle of Mui. Here, realpolitik didn't just meet the battlefield, it danced a violent tango with destiny itself. This wasn't just a skirmish, it was a seismic event that would shape the future of China. We're talking about a showdown in 1046 BCE where military strategy, political cunning, and a dash of opportunism wove together like the threads of an intricate tapestry. First, let's debunk the legend of the righteous King Wu leading his troops like a knight in shining armor. Sure, the romantic narrative paints him as a hero with a heart of gold, but the reality was grittier. King Wu was more like a savvy CEO pulling a hostile takeover. He didn't just march his troops into battle with a noble speech. No, he skillfully gathered a coalition of disgruntled allies, including former Shang territories tired of being treated like second-rate franchises. The Zhou, under King Wu's leadership, didn't just rely on a single strategy. They had a game plan as layered as an onion. Besides leveraging alliances, they capitalized on the Shang's internal discord. Dai Xin, the last Shang king, was infamous for his tyrannical reign, a cocktail of excess and neglect that made him about as popular as a root canal. His own troops were so disillusioned that when the Zhou approached, many switched sides faster than you can say new management. Let's talk numbers, because in a battle, size does matter. The Zhou army was no ragtag bunch. King Wu reportedly commanded an impressive force of around 45,000 troops. Meanwhile, Dai Xin's forces supposedly numbered around 70,000. On paper, the Shang had the upper hand, but here's the kicker. Quantity doesn't always trump quality. Zhou soldiers were motivated, battle-hardened, and led by a leader who actually had a strategic plan, unlike Dai Xin, who was too busy living his best life to notice the cracks in his kingdom. The Battle of Mui was fought on the plains just outside the Shang capital of Yin. This was no epic clash under romantic moonlight with honorable duels. This was gritty, brutal, and costly. The Zhou knew that to win, they needed to exploit every weakness the Shang had. The legend tells us that King Wu gave a rousing speech that inspired his men to fight with the strength of 10 armies. But in reality, it was more about logistics than lofty words. King Wu's tactics were shrewd. He utilized quick maneuvers and targeted strikes, designed to disrupt the Shang's formations and morale. And here's where the myth meets its match. The infamous tale of the Shang soldiers defecting mid-battle. While the legend embellishes this as a divine sign of the Zhou's moral superiority, the truth was more transactional. Many Shang troops were simply fed up with their king's neglect and saw a better deal with the Zhou. It's the kind of disillusionment that could turn a battle on its head, and it did. Now, let's not forget the cost of war. This wasn't a Hollywood epic where everyone walks away unscathed. The Battle of Mui was a bloodbath, with casualties mounting as both sides fought tooth and nail. War, even in ancient times, was an expensive proposition. The Zhou's military campaign would have required substantial resources, weaponry, provisions, and not least, the loyalty of their men. This wasn't just a battle of swords, but of economic endurance. The Zhou's ability to sustain such an effort was a testament to their strategic planning and resource management. In the aftermath of the battle, the Shang dynasty crumbled like a sandcastle hit by a tidal wave. Dai Xin, realizing the inevitable, chose the dramatic exit of self-immolation, a fiery end befitting a king who'd burned too many bridges. The Zhou, on the other hand, emerged victorious, not just because of their military prowess, but because they understood the bigger picture. They didn't just defeat an army, they dismantled a dynasty by seizing the moment when the cracks were too wide to mend. The triumph at Mui wasn't just about the battlefield heroics. It was about the Zhou's ability to read the room, politically speaking. They had the foresight to present themselves as the harbingers of a new era, promising stability and prosperity in place of the Shang's chaos. It's a classic coup de théâtre, where the actors knew their roles and played them to perfection. In the grand tapestry of history, the fall of the Shang and the rise of the Zhou mark a turning point not just in China's story, but in the understanding of power dynamics. It's a reminder that even the mightiest can fall if they ignore the signs, and underestimate the resolve of those they oppress. The Zhou, with their clever maneuvering and impeccable timing, didn't just change their own fate. They rewrote the rulebook on how to overthrow a dynasty. So, as the Zhou took their hard-won place on the throne, they did so with a keen awareness of the weight of their victory. The Battle of Mui wasn't just a military conquest. It was a masterclass in strategy, patience, and the art of knowing when to strike. The Shang had been a cautionary tale of complacency, while the Zhou became the embodiment of seizing opportunity. And this, my friends, is where we leave our tale for now, on the brink of a new dynasty, with the Zhou standing at the dawn of their reign, ready to shape the future in ways that even they couldn't yet imagine. But that, as they say, is a story for another time. As the Zhou took their hard-won place on the throne, the ink was barely dry on their victory before they faced the real challenge, convincing everyone they deserved to be there. Sure, they'd taken down the Shang with a well-timed coup, but now they needed more than just brute force to solidify their newfound dominance. Needed a story, something that would resonate with the masses and legitimize their rule. Enter the Mandate of Heaven, an ancient Chinese concept that was about to get the PR overhaul of the millennium. The Mandate of Heaven was a brilliant piece of celestial marketing, a divine thumbs-up that said, yes, these guys are the real deal. Forget about divine right and royal bloodlines. This was all about meritocracy, ancient style. The Zhou weren't just rulers, they were chosen ones, backed by the gods themselves. But here's the kicker. This mandate wasn't a lifetime guarantee. The guards could revoke it faster than a bouncer kicking out an unruly patron if the dynasty didn't uphold their end of the bargain, namely, good governance and moral integrity. It was accountability with a capital A, and it had the added benefit of keeping everyone on their toes. Let's dive into the economics of it all because, as any ruler knows, divine right doesn't pay the bills. The Zhou had to juggle tradition with innovation like a circus performer spinning plates. They adopted Shang practices like ancestor worship and ritual sacrifices. You know, the good old-fashioned ways to ensure the ancestors stayed on their side. But they also introduced new administrative techniques to streamline governance. The Zhou were like the Silicon Valley startup of ancient China, mixing tried-and-true methods with fresh ideas. Central to their strategy was the Fengjian system, a feudal-like structure that could make even the most seasoned bureaucrat weep. The Zhou king parceled out land to relatives and trusted allies, who in turn governed these territories on his behalf. It was a decentralized approach that kept power close, but not too close, kind of like a king playing a game of chess with his vassals as the pawns. This system wasn't without its flaws, though. Delegating authority meant relying heavily on the loyalty and competence of these nobles, and let's just say not everyone was cut out for governance. The Fengjian system was a bit like handing over the car keys to a teenager. You hoped for the best, but braced for the worst. Now, let's talk about bureaucracy, or as it was known in the Zhou court, the ultimate test of patience. The Zhou tried to establish an efficient administration, but the reality was more akin to herding cats. The central government was tasked with overseeing vast territories, collecting taxes, and enforcing laws, all while ensuring that the nobles didn't decide to play king themselves. It was a Herculean task, and the system's efficiency, or lack thereof, was often at the mercy of human nature. Corruption, nepotism, and inefficiency were as common as chopsticks at a Chinese banquet. But here's the thing. Despite its flaws, the Zhou administration laid the groundwork for future Chinese governance. It was the first attempt at creating a structured bureaucracy, and while it didn't always function smoothly, it was a step towards more centralized control. The Zhou were essentially beta testing a system that would evolve over centuries, eventually becoming the sophisticated imperial bureaucracy China is famous for. The Zhou also understood the importance of economic stability. They continued the Shang's reliance on agriculture, but they were savvy enough to diversify. They encouraged trade, expanded infrastructure, and promoted technological advancements like iron smelting. This wasn't just about maintaining power. It was about creating a sustainable economy that could support a growing population. After all, a well-fed populace is a happy populace, or at least one less likely to start a rebellion. However, balancing tradition and innovation wasn't without its pitfalls. The Zhou's attempts at reform sometimes clashed with entrenched customs, leading to resistance from those who preferred things the old-fashioned way. It was a constant tug-of-war between progress and preservation, and the Zhou had to navigate it with the finesse of a diplomat at a peace conference. Despite these challenges, the Zhou dynasty managed to maintain its grip on power, in part because of its ability to adapt. They weren't afraid to borrow from their predecessors, while also forging their own path. It was this flexibility that allowed them to consolidate their rule and lay the foundations for what would become one of the longest-lasting dynasties in Chinese history. Yet, as with any great story, the Zhou's tale wasn't all smooth sailing. They faced internal strife, external threats, and the ever-present danger of complacency. But that's a tale for another time. A time when the Zhou would once again be tested by forces that would challenge their very existence. For now, though, they stood as the undisputed rulers of ancient China, their legacy just beginning to unfurl in the annals of history. The mandate of heaven may have been their divine endorsement, but it was their cunning, resilience, and adaptability that truly solidified their reign. The Zhou dynasty, armed with the celestial blessing of the mandate of heaven and a knack for political wizardry, now had to face the messy reality of governance. It's one thing to topple a dynasty with flair and fireworks. It's another to keep the kingdom running smoothly afterward. With the Fengjian system, the Zhou essentially handed out power like party favors, hoping it would keep the nobles happy and the empire cohesive. But as any party planner knows, too many favors can lead to chaos. The Fengjian system was a decentralized feudal structure where the king divvied up lands to relatives and loyalists, who in turn pledged their allegiance to the central authority. This setup was supposed to be a win-win. The king got a network of allies, and the nobles got a slice of the pie. But in practice, it was more like a game of telephone, where the king's decrees often got lost or distorted by the time they reached the outer territories. Let's break it down. The Zhou king was the big cheese, but he needed to keep his vassals, those local rulers, on a tight leash. These vassals were supposed to govern their territories, collect taxes, raise armies, and generally maintain order. In return, they were expected to show up with troops whenever the king called for a military campaign. Think of it as the ancient version of getting your friends to help you move, except with spears and chariots. But here's where the system got sticky. The further you got from the Zhou capital, the less control the king had. It's the classic long-distance relationship dilemma, out of sight, out of mind. Some vassals, feeling frisky with their newfound autonomy, started acting like mini-kings. They made decisions based on local interests rather than what was best for the empire. Imagine a group project where one member decides they're the boss. Things can get messy fast. Economically, the Fengjian system was a mixed bag. On one hand, it promoted local governance and allowed for tailored solutions to local problems. On the other, it could lead to inefficiency and corruption. The vassals, tasked with tax collection, often skimmed off the top before sending the money to the central government. It's the age-old problem of putting the fox in charge of the henhouse. Let's talk numbers. The Zhou Empire was vast, covering an area roughly the size of modern-day France. Managing such a territory required a complex network of roads and communication channels, which the Zhou invested in heavily. They built roads that stretched like ancient superhighways, facilitating trade and troop movements. This infrastructure was a marvel of its time, allowing the Zhou to maintain a semblance of control over their sprawling empire. Now, let's shift gears and peek into the lives of the common folks during this era. The average Zhou citizen was likely a farmer, toiling in fields of millet and wheat. Agriculture was the lifeblood of the economy, and the Zhou encouraged innovations like the iron plow to boost productivity. But life wasn't all sunshine and bumper crops. Farmers had to pay taxes to their local lords, who often demanded a hefty share of their harvests. It was a hard-knock life, where a bad season could mean the difference between survival and starvation. Despite the challenges, Zhou era saw significant advancements in agricultural techniques. The introduction of crop rotation and improved irrigation methods helped increase yields, which in turn supported population growth. By 800 BCE, the population of China had swelled to around 20 million. That's a lot of mouths to feed, and the Zhou's ability to manage this growth was a testament to their administrative prowess, or at least their ability to muddle through with relative success. However, the socio-economic structure wasn't all roses and rainbows. The Fengjian system, while innovative, planted the seeds for future discord. With power spread out like a buffet, some vassals grew too powerful, threatening the central authority. It's the classic empire-building conundrum. How do you keep the empire unified when everyone wants a bigger slice of the pie? The Zhou also faced external pressures. Nomadic tribes on the fringes of the empire were a constant threat, conducting raids that kept the border regions in a state of perpetual tension. These tribes, with their hit-and-run tactics, were the thorn in the Zhou's side, requiring constant vigilance and a standing army ready to respond at a moment's notice. As the Zhou managed these internal and external challenges, they also fostered a cultural renaissance. This period saw the flourishing of Chinese philosophy, with figures like Confucius and Laozi emerging to shape the intellectual landscape. Their teachings would profoundly influence Chinese society, emphasizing ethics, governance, and the individual's role within the community. It's like the Zhou were hosting the ultimate TED talk series, with ideas that would resonate for millennia. But let's not sugarcoat it. The Zhou's rule was far from perfect. The decentralized system, while innovative, was fraught with potential for rebellion and fragmentation. By the time the Western Zhou period transitioned into the Eastern Zhou period around 770 BCE, cracks were beginning to show. The Fengjian system, initially a strength, was turning into a liability as ambitious nobles saw opportunities for independence. In the end, the Zhou's approach to governance was a double-edged sword. They were pioneers in decentralization, but the very system they championed was laying the groundwork for future instability. As they danced on this political tightrope, the Zhou had to constantly adapt, innovate, and negotiate to keep their empire intact. So, as we wrap up this chapter, let's leave the Zhou at this pivotal moment in their history. Their innovative feudal system had set the stage for both their success and their potential downfall. The balance of power, the socio-economic dynamics, and the cultural developments all intertwined to shape the destiny of this remarkable dynasty. But remember, the story is far from over. The Zhou's tale of ambition, innovation, and resilience continues to unfold, with more twists and turns waiting just around the corner. Stay tuned, because this saga of ancient China is only getting started. The Zhou dynasty, with its grand ambitions and grander challenges, felt the weight of its own innovations as time trudged on. The Fengjian system, once hailed as the beacon of decentralized brilliance, gradually morphed into a Pandora's box of political mischief. Those sprightly vassals, who had once been the empire's loyal foot soldiers, began to eye the throne with a dangerous gleam. The Western Zhou, a beacon of ancient Chinese might, now found itself at the mercy of its own fragmented legacy. Now, let's tackle the romanticized narrative of the Zhou's decline. Picture, if you will, a noble court besieged by dragons of greed and betrayal. Sounds epic, right? Well, reality is much less poetic and far more human. The Zhou's downfall wasn't a sudden catastrophe, but a slow burn, like a pot left simmering too long on the stove. By the 8th century BCE, the Zhou kings were more figureheads than rulers, with the real power splintered among the ambitious lords who grew fat off their fiefdoms. It was less a tale of tragic heroics, and more a cautionary story of complacency and missed opportunities. Let's talk specifics. Around 771 BCE, King of Zhou made the kind of political blunder that could make any seasoned advisor facepalm. Obsessed with his concubine Bao Si, he went so far as to replace his queen and heir with her and her son. This didn't sit well with the queen's family, the powerful Shen clan, who promptly allied with the barbarian tribes to the west. It's the kind of family drama that makes Thanksgiving dinners look tame by comparison. Predictably, this led to the disastrous sack of Heijing, the capital, by these allied forces. The Western Zhou era effectively ended with King Yu's death, a sobering reminder of how personal folly can have empire-wide repercussions. Economically, the Zhou's decline was equally tangled. Initially, their innovations in agriculture and infrastructure had brought prosperity, but unchecked power and regional autonomy sowed seeds of economic disparity. Those bustling trade routes that once hummed with prosperity began to fracture under the strain of competing interests. The nobles, now akin to small-time warlords, prioritized their own coffers over the empire's unity. It was like watching a once thriving startup implode under the weight of too many CEOs. Zhou's military, once a formidable force, became another victim of this fragmentation. The standing army that had once been the pride of the empire was now a patchwork of mercenary troops and regional forces, each loyal more to their local lords than the Zhou king. This lack of a unified military front left the Zhou vulnerable to external threats, particularly from the nomadic tribes that roamed the northern borders with all the subtlety of a bull in a china shop. The nomads, like the Rong and the Dai, were the perennial thorns in the Zhou side. While the Zhou were busy squabbling over internal power struggles, these tribes saw opportunities to raid and pillage. The borders became a perilous zone where the Zhou's influence waned with every incursion. The empire's once sturdy outer defenses were now akin to a sieve, barely able to hold back the tide of barbarian invasions. The socio-political landscape was equally fraught. The Zhou kings, now ensconced in the new eastern capital of Luoyang, found themselves playing referee in a game they barely controlled. The Eastern Zhou period marked a shift in power dynamics, with the empire's cohesion unraveling like a poorly knitted sweater. The famous spring and autumn period that followed saw over 140 states, once loyal to the Zhou, operating more like independent fiefdoms. The Zhou king's role was reduced to that of a ceremonial figurehead, presiding over an empire in name only. But let's not just dwell on the chaos and conflict. Despite the disarray, this period was also a crucible for cultural and intellectual richness. The vacuum of centralized power allowed for a flourishing of thought and philosophy. It was during this time that Confucius, Laozi, and a host of other philosophers began to ponder the nature of society, governance, and morality. Their ideas, birthed in an era of fragmentation, would echo through Chinese history, shaping the moral and ethical foundations of the nation for centuries to come. Yet, the legacy of the Zhou is a complex tapestry. They bequeathed to China not only an empire that eventually disintegrated, but also a framework for governance and culture that endured long after their political power waned. The mandate of heaven, that celestial seal of approval, would become a cornerstone of Chinese political doctrine, invoked by countless dynasties to validate their rule. It was the Zhou who, despite their fall, laid the groundwork for a China that would repeatedly rise, phoenix-like, from the ashes of its own tumultuous history. In the end, the decline of the Western Zhou is a tale as old as time, one of internal strife, external pressures, and the inevitable ebb and flow of power. It's a story that strips away the romantic veneer of ancient dynastic glory, revealing the gritty reality beneath. The Zhou dynasty, in all its complexity, serves as a reminder that even the grandest of empires can stumble when unity is sacrificed on the altar of ambition. As we draw this epic to a close, let's take a moment to reflect on the Zhou's enduring legacy. They were trailblazers in governance, culture, and philosophy, their influence stretching across millennia. Their story, with all its triumphs and tribulations, offers a mirror to our own human nature, a testament to the fragility of power and the resilience of ideas. The Zhou may have fallen, but their legacy continues to shape the narrative of China, a testament to the enduring power of innovation, adaptation, and the indomitable spirit of a people. And that, dear listeners, is how history keeps us awake with its timeless tales. Your eyelids flutter open to the sound of clinking tankards and a rooster who clearly thinks it's a bard. Welcome to the medieval inn, where the ambience is less luxury retreat and more lively chaos with a dash of questionable hygiene. You're nestled in a straw mattress that's probably seen more action than a modern-day hotel bed during spring break. Around you, merchants, travelers, and the occasional lost noble are beginning to stir, each one nursing the kind of hangover that makes you question the life choices that led you here. Now, let's talk architecture. These inns weren't exactly trying to win any beauty pageants. Think timber frames, thatched roofs, and walls that might hold if you so much as lean on them too hard. But hey, they've got character right. The inn is strategically plopped along a bustling trade route, because back in the day, location was everything. Inns were the medieval equivalent of gas stations. A central pit, stops for weary travelers needing rest, food, and let's face it, a good gossip session. Inns were vital cogs in the medieval economy. They fueled trade by providing merchants and messengers a place to rest their bones and fill their bellies. The lodgings were often located near busy roads or river crossings, the medieval version of today's prime real estate. And in a time when travelling from London to Canterbury could take days rather than hours, these inns were lifesavers, or at least foot-savers. Speaking of economics, let's talk cash. A night at an inn in 13th century England might set you back a couple of silver pennies, roughly what you pay for a halfway decent ale. Not that the medieval inexperience had Michelin stars on its mind. You'd be lucky if the bedbugs didn't charge you a toll, considering the sparse amenities. Forget about room service, unless you count the innkeeper's dog as a concierge. Meals were communal, served in the main hall where everyone from knights to knaves dined elbow to elbow, sharing stories, and occasionally fleas. The innkeeper is the unofficial mayor of this small, bustling world. Part host, part bouncer, and sometimes part judge when disputes over whose horse is whose arise. Inns were more than just places to crash. They were social hubs where news travelled faster than a horse-drawn carriage. You'd find out who's waging war, who's been excommunicated, and which monarch is currently losing their mind, all over a bowl of dubious stew. And about that stew, don't ask what's in it, unless you want an existential crisis. Food at a medieval inn is a gamble, a sort of culinary roulette where the house usually wins. Meat, if available, is heavily salted or spiced to mask the fact it's a tad past its prime. Bread is your safest bet, assuming you don't mind the occasional crunch of grit from poorly milled flour. But let's not romanticize this too much. The reality was often grim. Inns could be rough places, frequented by people from all walks of life, not all of whom had the best intentions. You've got merchants with their pockets jingling with silver, knights looking for a fight or a flirt, and pilgrims who might be more interested in the local ale than the local shrine. It's a melting pot of humanity, bound together by necessity and the shared goal of surviving another day on the road. Yet, despite the chaos and discomfort, there's a certain camaraderie here, a shared humanity that bridges the gap between the classes and the chaos. You're part of a centuries-old tradition, sitting in the same room where deals were made, plans were hatched, and perhaps a conspiracy or two was born. You sip your ale, which tastes like it could double as paint stripper, and listen to stories of far-off lands and daring deeds. This is the medieval inexperience, rough, ready, and undeniably alive. You glance at your bowl of stew, and let's be honest here, it's less a culinary masterpiece and more of a medieval mystery. You think the innkeeper moonlights as a cryptic chef, tossing in ingredients like he's concocting a potion rather than a meal. But hey, at least it's warm, right? The reality of dining in a medieval inn is a far cry from those banquet scenes you see in movies, where tables groan under the weight of roasted boars and goblets overflow with wine. Here, the menu is more pragmatic than palatial, dictated by necessity, and the seasons rather than any Michelin aspirations. Let's start with bread. It's the cornerstone of the medieval diet, and not the artisanal sourdough variety that hipsters rave about. No, this is more like a wheat and rye hybrid that's as dense as a history textbook, and sometimes spiked with a little extra crunch thanks to poorly milled grains. If you're lucky, your loaf won't double as a projectile weapon. Bread served at inns was often a day or two old, verging on stale, because who's got time to bake fresh loaves every morning when you're busy wrangling a room full of rowdy travellers? And then there's the meat. Meat in a medieval inn, less farm to table, more salt to survive. Preserving meat back then was a bit like trying to keep a secret, difficult and prone to failure. Salt was the superstar preservative, applied liberally to keep the meat from turning into a science experiment. Spices were also a go-to, but not for the reasons you might think. Sure, they add flavor, but they're also great at masking the not-so-freshness of the dish. Eating meat at an inn was like playing the lottery, except the prize was not getting sick. Seasonality played a huge role in what was served. Forget about today's global supply chains. Back then, what you ate was very much what could be gathered, hunted, or grown around you. Spring might bring fresh greens and herbs to the table, while winter could see you nibbling on root vegetables and whatever dried goods hadn't been raided by mice. It's almost poetic, really, eating in harmony with the land's natural cycles, except when those cycles left you with little more than turnips and desperation. Now, let's talk about ale, the medieval beverage of choice. Water was often suspect, teeming with the sort of bacteria you wouldn't want to invite to dinner. Ale, on the other hand, was the safer bet. Fermentation had a way of killing off the nasties, making it the medieval equivalent of a health drink, albeit one with a kick. But before you romanticize it, remember that this was not the craft beer you sip while wearing plaid. Medieval ale could be weak, sour, and about as palatable as a wet sock. Yet it was the social lubricant of choice, fueling discussions, arguments, and the occasional brawl. The romantic notion of the medieval feast, with its opulent spreads and endless courses, is largely just that, a notion. The average inn offered fare that was simple, hearty, and utilitarian. You were eating to survive, not to savor. Sure, there were exceptions, especially if you found yourself in a particularly prosperous town or during a festival, but those were the bonuses, not the baseline. And those extravagant banquets you hear about, reserved for the upper crust of society, who had the means to indulge, while the rest dined on practicality. Dining at an inn also came with its own set of health risks. Forget about food poisoning being a modern affliction. It's been a culinary companion throughout history. The combination of questionably preserved food, rudimentary cooking techniques, and poor sanitation was a recipe for disaster. It's a miracle anyone survived to tell the tale, really. And yet, they did, perhaps with the help of a hardy constitution or sheer stubbornness. This was medieval dining, an adventure on a plate, where the only guarantee was that there were no guarantees. So, as you sit there, spoon in hand, pondering the medieval dining experience, you can't help but appreciate the resilience of those who lived it. They navigated the culinary minefield with a combination of pragmatism and perseverance, making do with what they had while dreaming of better. The reality was often harsh, but it was their reality, and they faced it with a grit that's admirable, if not enviable. And as you take another sip of your ale, you realize that while the setting has changed, the spirit of survival is timeless, echoing through the ages with every bite. And as you take another sip of your ale, pondering the survival spirit of medieval diners, you can't help but notice the buzz of conversation around you. This inn is more than a pit stop for weary travelers. It's a microcosm of medieval society, a place where nobles and commoners rub shoulders, sometimes literally, thanks to the cramped quarters. In this dimly lit hall, social hierarchies blur faster than the lines after your third cup of ale. Let's talk about the innkeeper, shall we? This person is the beating heart of the operation, equal parts diplomat, enforcer, and town crier. Think of them as the medieval equivalent of a modern-day CEO, except instead of balancing spreadsheets, they're balancing the egos and antics of a ragtag group of patrons. The innkeeper is your go-to for anything from a bed for the night to the latest gossip on which local lord is feuding with whom. In a world without newspapers or social media, inns were the nerve centers of information exchange. If walls could talk, these walls would probably tell tales juicier than the stew you're trying to choke down. Social dynamics here are as complex as a Game of Thrones plotline, but with fewer dragons and more actual stakes. You've got merchants haggling over textile prices, knights boasting about their latest jousting victories, and peasants discussing the local harvest. This isn't just small talk, it's survival. Information is currency, and knowing who's in, who's out, and who's about to be in big trouble could mean the difference between prosperity and ruin. You could think of the medieval inn as a kind of LinkedIn for the Middle Ages, minus the endorsements, but with a lot more ale-fueled endorsements. But let's not paint too rosy a picture. This communal setting is a double-edged sword. Sure, you might overhear a juicy tidbit that gives you an edge in the local market, but there's also the not-so-minor issue of safety, or the lack thereof. Inns were hotbeds of intrigue, and occasionally crime. The mingling of different social classes also meant a mingling of motives, and not all of them were pure. With everyone cramped together like sardines in a barrel, pickpockets and con artists had a field day. Your purse could vanish faster than a slice of cake at a toddler's birthday party. And let's not forget about the brawls. Ah, yes, the medieval inn brawl. A time-honored tradition that could erupt over anything from a spilled drink to a perceived insult. In a world where personal honor was as fragile as the inn's wooden furniture, disagreements had a way of escalating quickly. Innkeepers, ever the peacekeepers, often had to wield their authority, and sometimes a club to restore order. It was part of the job description. Right alongside, serve ale, and ignore questionable stew content. Now, you might be wondering why anyone would risk staying in such a volatile environment. The answer, necessity. Travel in the medieval period was no Sunday drive. Journeys were long, wearying, and fraught with danger. Inns offered a semblance of safety, a roof over your head, a fire to warm your bones, and a community to blend into. In a world where isolation could spell disaster, an inn was your best bet for survival. It was the medieval version of safety in numbers, even if those numbers included a few unsavory characters. Inns also played host to clandestine meetings and secretive dealings. When you think of medieval plots and machinations, forget about shadowy castles and midnight rendezvous. More often than not, plans to topple a rival or evade taxes were hatched over a pint in the corner of a bustling inn. The anonymity provided by the constant flow of travelers made inns ideal for those looking to conduct business away from prying eyes. If you needed to exchange a few whispered words or pass a discreet note, this was the place. Just be wary of the innkeeper's ears. They were as sharp as a hawk's, ever on the lookout for profitable tidbits. Despite the risks, or perhaps because of them, inns were indispensable. They were the heartbeat of the medieval travel network, offering a unique blend of security and peril. They were places where stories were not just told, but lived, where the ordinary and extraordinary collided in a cacophony of voices and clinking tankards. It was a world where the mundane met the magnificent, all within the creaky, sometimes smoky, confines of a medieval inn. So, as you sit there, listening to the tales and watching the drama unfold around you, you realize that while the times have changed, the essence of human interaction remains the same. The need to connect, to share stories, to find common ground amidst chaos. It's a tale as old as time, and there's no better place to witness it than in the lively, unpredictable world of a medieval inn. And just like that, the stew doesn't seem quite so mysterious anymore. It's all part of the experience, a taste of history served up with a side of unexpected camaraderie. And as you soak in the lively chatter around you, let's shift gears from the camaraderie to the less than glamorous side of medieval inn life. Because, dear traveler, while the tale-telling and ale-swilling paint a vibrant picture, there's a whole other story lurking in the shadows, one that involves hygiene or the medieval lack thereof. Let's cut to the chase. A medieval inn was about as hygienic as a toddler's playroom after a sugar-fueled birthday party. Picture this, except don't. If you're squeamish, shared sleeping arrangements that made modern budget airlines look spacious. You weren't just bunking with your buddies. You were cozying up with strangers, merchants, and anyone else unlucky enough to snag a spot on the floor. It was a veritable slumber party from hell, minus the marshmallows and ghost stories. Take the bedding, for instance. We're talking straw mattresses that doubled as homes for every creepy crawly you can imagine. Fleas, lice, bedbugs were your unwelcome bedfellows, and let's just say they weren't big on personal space. Forget the romantic notions of hearthside tales and cozy fireside chats. These sleeping quarters were less romantic escape and more pest control nightmare. The straw in your mattress wasn't just uncomfortable, it was a veritable ecosystem, a thriving metropolis for the medieval insect population. And the smell, oh, the smell. Imagine a potent cocktail of unwashed bodies, damp straw, and the occasional whiff of refuse from the street outside. Medieval inns weren't exactly known for their ventilation systems. In fact, windows were often tiny or non-existent, designed more for defense than for fresh air circulation. The result, an aroma that could only be described as eau de medieval, a fragrance so distinct it could probably peel paint. But let's talk plumbing. Or rather, the absence of it. Running water was a luxury reserved for the castles and manors, not the roadside inns catering to the common folk. Chamber pots were the norm, emptied into the street, or cesspit, with a casual disregard for sanitation. It's no wonder the streets often ran with more than just rainwater, and those romanticized images of medieval courtyards with fountains and gardens. Swap them for muddy yards and livestock, because that's the reality most inns dealt with. Economically, inns were doing the best they could with what they had. The infrastructure simply didn't exist to support anything like modern hygiene standards. Innkeepers focused on the essentials: food, drink, and a roof over your head. Cleanliness took a backseat, and not just because it was undervalued. It was a matter of practicality. When your patrons are trudging in after days on the road, covered in dust and grime, a pristine environment isn't high on their list of priorities. And while we're on the subject of priorities, consider this. Water was a commodity, not a right. Fetching it was labor-intensive, often involving a trip to the nearest well or river. Bathing was a luxury, not a daily ritual, and even when it happened, it was more of a communal affair. Picture a wooden tub filled with water that had already seen its fair share of bathers before you got in. The experience was less about cleanliness and more about a vague sense of refreshment. Now, let's debunk a particularly stubborn myth, the notion that medieval inns were places of quiet, rustic charm. The reality: they were bustling, chaotic, and often downright noisy. The main hall was a cacophony of sounds, from clinking tankards to raucous laughter and the occasional brawl. Privacy was a concept as foreign as the spices used to mask the stench of questionable meat. You were always surrounded by people, noise, and yes, the occasional livestock wandering through. But despite the grime and the chaos, the medieval inn was a vital institution. It was a place where society's many layers intersected, where news was exchanged, and where weary travelers found a semblance of home. It was a microcosm of medieval life, with all its beauty and brutality, its warmth and its weariness. You could say these inns were the original social networks, alive with the hustle and bustle of human connection, however flawed. And as you nestle deeper into your straw mattress, itching away the bites of your flea companions, you can't help but marvel at the resilience of those who came before us. They navigated a world that was harsher, dirtier, and more uncertain than we can imagine, yet they did so with an unyielding spirit. Perhaps that's the true legacy of the medieval inn, not the discomfort or the disorder, but the humanity that persisted despite it all. So there you are, nestled among straw and fleas, pondering just how our ancestors managed to thrive in such a chaotic, grimy environment. And yet, thrive they did. Medieval inns, with all their flaws, were the lifeblood of travel and commerce, the bustling hubs where humanity in all its gritty glory converged. You see, despite the dirt, discomfort, and dubious dining options, these inns were indispensable to the medieval world, much like your favorite coffee shop, albeit with less caffeine and more lice. Let's dive into the economics for a second. Inns were the medieval answer to the modern-day logistics chain, strategically positioned like pearls on a necklace along trade routes. They enabled the flow of goods, ideas, and yes, gossip, allowing merchants to rest and refresh before continuing their journeys. Back then, trade wasn't just a matter of economic survival, it was a means of cultural exchange. A merchant's tale of exotic spices or textiles wasn't just a story. It was a window into another world, shared over a pint in the flickering firelight of the inn's common room. These establishments were more than simple shelters. They were the arteries of medieval commerce. Imagine the roads as veins, pulsating with the lifeblood of trade, grain, wool, wine, and more, flowing steadily through the continent. Inns provided the necessary pit stops, ensuring that this lifeblood didn't dry up. They were quite literally the rest stops of the medieval highway, fueling an economic engine that drove progress across Europe. But beyond their economic function, inns were the crucibles of social change. The mingling of different classes under one thatched roof fostered an exchange of ideas that was as transformative as it was inevitable. Picture it: a weary noble seated next to a canny merchant, each learning from the other's experiences and perspectives. These interactions, born of necessity, sowed the seeds of a more interconnected society. Merchants picked up courtly manners, while nobles learned the value of trade and enterprise. It was a two-way street that broadened horizons and slowly chipped away at the rigid class structures of the time. And here's where things get interesting. The very same inns that were hotbeds of chaos and germs were also the forerunners of modern hospitality. They were the blueprint for today's hotels, motels, and bed and breakfasts, albeit with a few more creature comforts and a lot less straw. The innkeeper, juggling roles as host, referee, and local news anchor, was the precursor to the modern hotel manager. They understood the fine art of balancing hospitality with practicality, an art that remains at the core of the hospitality industry today. We can learn more than a few lessons from these medieval stalwarts. For starters, the importance of adaptability in the face of constant change. Inns evolved over time, adjusting to the needs of their patrons, whether that meant introducing more private sleeping arrangements or offering better security to protect against the occasional brigand. The successful innkeeper knew how to read the room, literally, and pivot as needed, a skill as valuable now as it was then. And then there's the lesson of community. Inns were vibrant, messy melting pots where people came together out of necessity, forming connections that transcended social boundaries. They remind us that even in the most challenging circumstances, there's strength in numbers and value in diversity. The inn was proof that everyone, from the lowliest peasant to the loftiest lord, could find common ground when united by shared goals. Of course, the allure of medieval inns continues to captivate modern imaginations, often through a rose-tinted lens. Pop culture loves to romanticize these places as quaint, rustic refuges where knights and fair maidens exchanged longing glances over goblets of mead. The reality, as we've explored, was far less glamorous, a heady mix of grit, grime, and survival. Yet, despite the stark reality, there's an undeniable charm in the thought of sitting by the hearth, listening to tales of adventure and intrigue. Perhaps it's the sense of connection, the idea that in a world of uncertainty, inns provided a semblance of stability, a place where stories were shared, friendships forged, and history quietly unfolded. It's a nostalgia for a time when life was lived more viscerally, when the line between hardship and hospitality was as thin as the walls of the inn itself. In the end, medieval inns were much more than just buildings. They were living entities, dynamic and ever-changing, reflecting the world around them. They were places where the ordinary intersected with the extraordinary, where the fabric of society was woven one night at a time. And while we've traded straw mattresses for memory foam and communal stews for room service, the essence of the inn experience lives on in every hotel lobby and roadside diner, a testament to the enduring human need for connection, comfort, and a good story shared over a drink. So, as you drift off to sleep, scratching at the occasional flea bite and surrounded by the soft murmur of centuries-old conversations, take comfort in the fact that you've been part of a timeless tradition. You've walked in the footsteps of countless travelers who, despite the odds, found a slice of home in the most unlikely of places. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real magic of the medieval inn, a place where the past feels just a little bit closer and the stories never really end. You find yourself in the bustling heart of the Hittite Empire around 1600 BCE. There's a distinct hum in the air, a symphony of merchants haggling for wheat, artisans shaping metal, and the occasional clatter of chariots. You know, the ancient equivalent of a sports car, but with more horsepower. Here in Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, you're in a land that's as fertile as it is fierce, where agriculture and warfare are two sides of the same bronze coin. The Hittites were an empire of contradictions. On one hand, you've got this image of them as invincible warriors, the kind who'd make even the bravest Mycenaean break into a sweat. On the other, there's the reality that their military prowess was as much a result of their geography and economy as it was of sheer brawn. The Hittites sat on a gold mine of resources, literally. Rich in metals like copper and iron, they were the metallurgists of their day, churning out weapons and tools that were as sharp as their ambitions. Their empire stretched its fingers across what we now call Turkey and dipped into Syria. This wasn't just a random expansion. You see, the lands they controlled were the Silk Roads of their era. Trade routes crisscrossed through Hittite territory like a web, bringing in goods, ideas, and occasionally trouble. And let's not forget agriculture, the backbone of their economy. Fertile lands meant bountiful harvests, and bountiful harvests meant you could feed an army that needed to be fed, armed, and ready, because peace in this neck of the woods was about as common as a unicorn at a barbecue. But let's talk about this so-called invincible army. Sure, the Hittites had some neat tricks up their sleeves, like the three-man chariot crew, driver, shield-bearer, and archer, which was their not-so-secret weapon. They were like the special forces of the ancient world, quick to strike and hard to catch. And yet, this image of an unbeatable force is a bit of ancient marketing. The Hittites, for all their might, were often pushing up against equally formidable foes, like the Egyptians. Remember the Battle of Kadesh in 1274 BCE? It was less a decisive victory and more of a stalemate with a side of diplomatic spin. Both sides claimed victory, proving that ancient PR was as crafty as today's political strategists. Back to the empire's guts, its economy. You couldn't just rely on muscle and metal. You needed to grease the wheels with trade. The Hittites were savvy traders, dealing in everything from textiles to tin. They were the Amazon of the ancient world, minus the 2-day shipping. And let's talk numbers. A clay tablet from the era mentions a transaction involving 30 minas of copper. What's a mina, you ask? Think of it as about half a kilogram. In today's terms, that copper deal was like moving a small fortune. In this world, power was as much about alliances as it was about armies. Treaties were forged with as much care as swords, and often they were crafted in cuneiform, the Hittite script that was as intricate as their politics. These guys knew that a good treaty was like a well-baked loaf of bread. It kept the peace and was essential for survival. Despite their might, the Hittites were as vulnerable to internal strife as any empire. Succession disputes were the soap operas of their day, with brothers sometimes more interested in stabbing each other in the back than facing external threats. And yet, for all their internal drama and the ever-looming threat of attack, the Hittites managed to hold it together for centuries. They were like the cat with 9 lives, always bouncing back from the brink of collapse. So, as you wander through the streets of this ancient power, take a moment to appreciate the blend of grit and grandeur. The Hittites were a people of paradoxes, their world a tapestry of trade and turmoil, swords and scripts. Here, in this land of ancient warriors and wheelers and dealers, you get a taste of what it meant to be a Hittite, fortified by their geography, driven by their economy, and forever navigating the fine line between invincibility and reality. With your sandals firmly planted on the cobblestones of Harusa, the Hittite capital, it's time to dive into the political playground where power was as slippery as the clay tablets they wrote on. The Hittite political landscape was a game of thrones that made modern politics look like child's play. At the top of this ancient hierarchy sat the king, a figure who wasn't just a ruler but almost god-like. We're talking about a mix of CEO and high priest, with a dash of divine right thrown in for good measure. This wasn't just any monarchy, it was a centralized powerhouse, a machine that ran on a finely tuned mix of fear, respect, and the occasional divine intervention. The king was considered the earthly representative of the storm god, Tarhunt, which made his word as close to law as you could get without a gavel. This divine association wasn't just for show. It was a political tool as sharp as a Hittite sword, keeping the nobles in line and the common folk in awe. But let's not sugarcoat it. Being king wasn't all peaches and papyrus. You had to keep an eye on your back, because Hittite succession rituals were a cutthroat affair. We're talking family feuds that would make a soap opera look tame. If you thought sibling rivalries were bad now, try adding a crown into the mix. Succession wasn't a simple matter of passing on the family business. No, it involved strategic marriages, a few strategic eliminations, and enough intrigue to fill a season of your favorite drama series. And if you think you could just rest easy once you had that crown on your head, think again. Coup attempts were the ancient version of a job performance review, and failing one could mean an early retirement, permanently. Take the case of King Mercilly Roman II, who ruled around 1321 BCE. His reign was marked by challenges from within his own family. His brothers weren't exactly sending him fruit baskets. Instead, they were busy plotting his downfall. The political landscape was so volatile that it wasn't unheard of for kings to mysteriously disappear, their reigns cut short by a rival's ambition and a carefully placed dagger. To navigate this snake pit, Hittite kings had to be more than just warriors. They had to be master diplomats. It was like balancing on a tightrope made of chariot wheels. One wrong move, and you'd find yourself in the dust. Marriage alliances were the diplomatic currency of the day, and the Hittites spent it wisely. A well-placed marriage could secure peace with a neighboring kingdom or bring a troublesome noble under control. Think of it as the ancient version of keep your friends close and your enemies closer. A prime example of this was the marriage alliance with Egypt. Around 1258 BCE, the Hittite king Harusa Roman III married off his daughter to the Egyptian pharaoh, Ramesses Roman II. This wasn't just a union of two young hearts. It was a political maneuver crafted with the precision of a bronze sword. The Treaty of Kadesh, signed around the same time, was one of the earliest known peace treaties in history, a cuneiform compromise that kept these two superpowers from tearing each other apart. But let's not romanticize this too much. These alliances were as much about realpolitik as they were about peace and love. The Hittites knew that a good treaty could be as powerful as a well-trained army. It was all about maintaining the balance of power, a delicate dance that involved as much backroom negotiating as it did frontline fighting. As you wander through the halls of Harusa, you can almost hear the echoes of these ancient political machinations. The stone walls have seen it all. Alliances forged and broken, kings crowned and overthrown, treaties signed with a flourish of a stylus. This was a world where power was as transient as the seasons, and the only constant was change. So, as you navigate the political maze of the Hittite Empire, remember that behind every kingly decree and every royal marriage was a story of survival, ambition, and the relentless pursuit of power. This was a society that thrived on the edge, constantly balancing the divine with the mortal, the noble with the treacherous, and the practical with the mythical. And in this delicate balance, the Hittites carved out an empire that, for a time, stood as a testament to their ingenuity and resilience. So there you are, wandering the halls of Hadusa, and you can't help but wonder, who exactly lived in this ancient city, and how did they keep the whole empire train chugging along without derailing at every turn? Welcome to the social hierarchy of the Hittites, where status was as structured as a game of Jenga and just as precarious. At the top, you had the elite nobility, the creme de la creme of Hittite society. These folks weren't just sitting around in their palatial digs, eating figs and sipping whatever passed for fine wine back then. No, they were the decision makers, the ones with the power to shape the destiny of the empire. The nobility was a tight-knit group, and you had to be born into it, or marry well to get a seat at the table. Think of them as the ancient world's version of the 1%, with a bit more swordplay and a lot less Instagram. Below the nobility were the priests, who played a dual role as both spiritual leaders and political influencers. They were the intermediaries between the gods and the people, a position that came with both prestige and pressure. Imagine being the one everyone looks to when the harvest fails or the rivers flood. Talk about job stress. But being a priest also gave you access to power and wealth, especially since the Hittites were big on their religious practices. And then we have the common folk, the backbone of the Hittite Empire. Farmers, craftsmen, and traders. These were the people who kept the wheels of the economy turning. They weren't living in luxury, but they were essential to the empire's survival. The farmers worked the fertile lands of Anatolia, ensuring that the granaries were full and the army was fed. Craftsmen were busy shaping metals into weapons and tools, while traders moved goods along those ancient trade routes we talked about, making sure that the Hittites were always in the loop when it came to the latest trends in tin and textiles. Now, let's not sugarcoat it. Life for the common Hittite wasn't all sunshine and chariot races. The legal system was as brutal as it was efficient, with laws that would make even the most hardened lawyer think twice. The Hittites had a codified set of laws that covered everything from property disputes to personal injury, and the punishments were, shall we say, a tad severe. Commit theft. You might find yourself staring down the business end of a spear. Murder. That could lead to execution, or if you were lucky, a hefty fine. It was a world where justice was swift, and mercy was in short supply. But the legal system wasn't just about punishment. It was also about maintaining order in a society where power dynamics were constantly shifting. The Hittites understood that a well-ordered society was a stable society, and their laws reflected that. They were like the ancient version of a social contract. Follow the rules and you'll be fine. Break them, and well, you might want to reconsider your life choices. Now, let's turn our gaze to the Hittite pantheon, a veritable who's who of gods and goddesses that makes the Marvel universe look like a minimalist art exhibit. The Hittites were polytheistic to the core, worshipping a pantheon of deities that governed everything from the weather to warfare. At the top was Tarhunt, the storm god, whose favor was as crucial as a reliable Wi-Fi signal today. Then there was the sun goddess Arena, the moon god Casca, and a whole host of others, each with their own temples and rituals. Religious practices in Hittite society were a far cry from the Cumbaya circle you might imagine. We're talking about rituals that could get downright gory. Animal sacrifices were a common way to appease the gods, and on occasion, human sacrifices made the cut too. The idea was to keep the gods happy, because unhappy gods meant crop failures, military defeats, or worse. It was a divine game of appeasement, where the stakes were nothing short of life and death. So, as you meander through the remnants of this ancient world, take a moment to appreciate the layers of Hittite society. From the lofty heights of the nobility to the gritty reality of the commoners, each had a role to play in the grand tapestry of the empire. And while their world might seem distant and strange, the echoes of their lives, filled with ambition, faith, and survival, still resonate today. In the Hittite Empire, every person had their place. Every law had its purpose, and every ritual had its reason. And that's what made it a society that, for a while, thrived on the razor's edge between order and chaos, tradition and change. So, speaking of grand tapestries, let's unravel the threads of Hittite cultural achievements, often overshadowed by their reputation as ancient warlords. It's time to trade in the sword for a stylus and dive into the world of Hittite language and architecture, where their true genius shone through like a diamond in a coal mine. First up, their linguistic legacy. The Hittites were no slouches when it came to scribbling down their thoughts. They adopted the cuneiform script from their Mesopotamian neighbors, tweaking it to suit their own Indo-European language, which, by the way, makes them one of the earliest known Indo-European speaking peoples. Talk about being ahead of the linguistic curve. Their tablets, inscribed with this unique twist on cuneiform, are like the ancient world's version of a hard drive, storing everything from diplomatic correspondence to legal codes. Now, if you're picturing a Hittite scribe hunched over a clay tablet, stylus in hand, you're on the right track. But remember, these weren't just any old scribbles. The Hittites used their writing system to craft treaties, record omens, and even jot down some of the earliest recorded jokes. Okay, maybe not jokes as we know them, but definitely some ancient banter. Their archives, discovered in the ruins of Harusa, are a treasure trove of information that gives us a glimpse into their daily life and the bureaucratic behemoth that was the Hittite state. Speaking of Harusa, let's take a stroll through this ancient metropolis. This wasn't just any city. It was the beating heart of the Hittite Empire, a place where architecture met ambition head-on. Harusa was an architectural marvel of its time, with its massive fortifications, temples and palaces that screamed, "We've got power," from every stone. Picture towering walls stretching over 6 kilometers, constructed from limestone and granite, as if the city itself was armoring up for battle. These walls weren't just for show. They were a testament to Hittite engineering prowess and their need to keep potential invaders at bay. Now, before you get too swept away by the grandeur, let's pause for a reality check. Building and maintaining a city like Harusa was no small feat. It required a constant influx of resources and manpower, a logistical nightmare that could make even the most organized among us break out in hives. And while the city's imposing silhouette was a testament to Hittite might, it was also a drain on their resources. Sustainability. That wasn't exactly at the top of their agenda. The sheer scale of these projects was impressive, sure, but it left the Empire vulnerable, stretching their capabilities thinner than a papyrus sheet. Let's not forget the temples, those sacred spaces where the divine and mortal supposedly mingled. The Hittites dedicated significant real estate to their deities, constructing temples that were as much about politics as they were about piety. You see, religion and statecraft were two sides of the same coin. Keeping the gods happy meant keeping the kingdom stable, and these architectural wonders were like public relations campaigns to assure the gods and the people that everything was under divine control. Among these temples, the great temple of Harusa was the crown jewel, dedicated to the storm god Tarhunt and the sun goddess Arena. It was a sprawling complex, with storerooms that held offerings and treasures meant to appease the gods. But here's the kicker. A significant portion of the population was likely involved in the upkeep of these religious sites, diverting resources and labor from other potentially more pressing needs. And while the temples might have been spiritual sanctuaries, they were also stark reminders of the empire's precarious balancing act between religious devotion and practical governance. Let's circle back to the writing. The Hittites didn't just use their cuneiform for bureaucratic drudgery. They also recorded myths and epic tales, weaving a cultural tapestry that spoke to their values and beliefs. Their mythology, with its stories of gods and heroes, was as rich and complex as any Netflix series today, full of drama and divine intervention. It was through these tales that they explored themes of power, loyalty, and the often fickle nature of fate. And while these myths might sound like bedtime stories, they served a deeper purpose. They reinforced societal norms and provided a framework for understanding the world, a world that was as turbulent as the storms their gods commanded. More than just tales, these were cultural anchors in a sea of uncertainty, offering a sense of continuity and identity amidst the ebbs and flows of history. So, as we wander through the echoes of Hittite culture, it's clear that they were more than just warriors swinging swords in the dust. They were scribes, architects, and storytellers, crafting a legacy that would endure long after their empire had crumbled into ruins. The Hittites remind us that while power can be fleeting, the words we write and the stories we tell can echo through the ages. And in a world where might often overshadowed mind, the Hittites left behind a legacy that was as much about their cultural achievements as it was about their conquests. Stay tuned, because the Hittite saga is far from over. There's more to uncover about this empire of paradoxes, where every stone tells a story and every script holds a secret. The journey through the annals of Hittite history continues, with more tales of intrigue, resilience, and of course, the relentless pursuit of power. And now that we've painted a vivid picture of the Hittite cultural canvas, let's fast forward to the twilight of this ancient empire, when the bustling streets of Hadusa began to echo with an ominous silence. It's around 1200 BCE, and things are looking less like a chapter from a heroic epic, and more like a plot twist from a tragic saga. The decline of the Hittite Empire is underway, driven by economic hiccups, environmental shifts, and a little help from their frenemies, the Sea Peoples. First, let's talk cash, or whatever passed for currency back then. The Hittite economy, once a well-oiled machine, was grinding to a halt. Remember those fertile lands that were the empire's breadbasket? Well, they were starting to hit a rough patch, literally. Climate changes led to crop failures, and if we've learned anything from history, it's that hungry people aren't happy people. Add to this the drying up of trade routes, and you've got yourself an economic disaster that even the most ambitious Hittite king couldn't chariot race his way out of. And speaking of trade, the Hittites were getting the short end of the stick there too. The once bustling trade routes were being pinched by external pressures. The Sea Peoples, a mysterious confederation of seafaring raiders, were like the ancient version of pirates, but with fewer parrots and more destruction. These marauders swept across the Mediterranean like an unstoppable tide, leaving chaos in their wake. Picture this: your trade ships, which once brought exotic goods and much-needed resources, now lying at the bottom of the sea, courtesy of these unwelcome visitors. But let's not place all the blame on the Sea Peoples. The Hittites had their own internal demons to battle. Remember those family feuds and succession disputes we talked about? Well, they were back with a vengeance. The royal family was squabbling like it was their favorite Olympic sport, and this internal strife left the empire vulnerable. When you're busy watching your back for a dagger-wielding sibling, it's easy to miss the bigger threats knocking at your front door. The political landscape was so fractious that maintaining a united front against external threats became about as easy as herding cats. As if that wasn't enough, the empire's infrastructure was buckling under the weight of its own ambition. Those impressive walls of Hadusa, they were now more of a liability than an asset. Keeping them standing required resources that the empire could no longer spare. It's like trying to maintain a luxury car when you can barely afford the gas. The sheer scale of their earlier achievements became an Achilles heel, dragging them down as the cracks in the empire widened into chasms. With all these factors swirling together like a perfect storm, the Hittite Empire began to crumble. By around 1178 BCE, Hadusa was abandoned, its once grand halls left to the mercy of time and nature. The empire that had stood as a testament to human ingenuity and resilience was reduced to ruins, a cautionary tale of how quickly power can slip through your fingers when fortune turns her back. But let's not leave the Hittites in the dust without acknowledging their legacy. Despite their abrupt fall, they left a mark on history that's as indelible as a cuneiform tablet. Their legal codes influenced later civilizations, setting precedents in governance and law that echoed through the ages. The Hittite language, one of the earliest Indo-European tongues, paved the way for linguistic development that would shape future cultures. And let's not forget their cultural contributions, the myths, the architecture, and yes, even those brutal traditions that fascinate and horrify us in equal measure. In the end, the Hittites remind us of the dual nature of human achievement. Their story is one of triumph and tragedy, of building an empire from the ground up only to watch it fall apart like a clay tablet left out in the rain. It's a tale as old as time, where ambition and hubris dance a delicate waltz, often leading to a dramatic crescendo. Their brutal traditions, recorded and misremembered, serve as a stark reminder of the harsh realities of power and the relentless march of history. So the next time you're strolling through a museum or leafing through a history book, spare a thought for the Hittites, the empire that was as fierce as it was fleeting, a testament to the heights of human achievement and the inevitable decline that follows. In the grand tapestry of history, their threads are a vivid reminder that while empires rise and fall, the stories they leave behind continue to shape our understanding of the past, and perhaps offer a cautionary note for the future. They say nothing screams ancient civilization quite like a massive, mysterious stone triangle plonked in the middle of a desert. Welcome to the world of the Great Pyramid of Giza, the icon of ancient Egypt that's been defying logic, gravity, and conspiracy theorists for over 500 years. This isn't just any pile of rocks, talking about a structure that was the tallest man-made building on Earth until some ambitious medieval folks in Lincoln decided they needed a cathedral that touched the sky. With an original height of 146, 6 meters, or about 481 feet for those more familiar with the imperial system, it was a towering testament to the audacity and skill of the ancient Egyptians. Now, before you conjure up images of alien architects with laser beams, let's get one thing straight. Humans, not extraterrestrials, built this wonder. That's right. Just regular, albeit incredibly determined humans. About 3 million blocks of limestone, weighing an average of 5 tons each, were hauled into place, one back-breaking stone at a time. And these blocks didn't just appear out of nowhere. The majority came from nearby quarries, with some of the finer limestone sourced from Tura and granite from Aswan, hundreds of kilometers down the Nile. Talk about a logistical nightmare. So who were the muscle-bound heroes behind this monumental task? Contrary to popular belief, it wasn't an army of slaves toiling away under the whip. Recent archaeological findings suggest that a workforce of around 20,000 to 30,000 skilled laborers, craftsmen, and support staff were employed. These workers were organized into teams, lived in nearby temporary cities, and were likely on a rotating schedule to keep the construction going non-stop. The idea that they were slaves comes more from Hollywood than historical reality. Think of them as the ancient equivalent of a modern-day construction crew, minus the hard hats and safety vests. The cost of this enterprise wasn't just measured in sweat and sore backs. It was also a massive economic undertaking. Building the pyramid was an all-hands-on-deck affair for the Egyptian state, requiring a significant portion of its resources. The economy had to support not just the workers, but also the production of tools, the transport of materials, and the logistics of food and living accommodations. It's estimated that the workers were fed a diet rich in bread and beer, a far cry from the drudgery of a slave's existence. Even the ancient Greeks, who knew a thing or two about democracy and architecture, were impressed by the Egyptians' ability to coordinate such a project. And then there's the question of why. Why go to all this trouble to build a giant stone tomb for Pharaoh Khufu? Well, in ancient Egyptian culture, the afterlife was serious business. Khufu, like many pharaohs, believed he needed a monumental resting place that would ensure his immortality. The pyramid was a stairway to the heavens, a celestial launching pad for his soul. It was also a symbol of power, a statement to the world that said, "I'm the king, and I've got the pyramid to prove it." Of course, the allure of the pyramids has also spawned a legion of myths and legends, the most persistent being the aforementioned alien architects. Sure, it's fun to imagine little green men with advanced technology lending a hand, but the truth is far more impressive. The Egyptians developed ingenious methods to move and position the massive blocks without modern machinery. They likely used sledges, lubricated with water, to reduce friction on the sand, and employed ramps to achieve the necessary height. It was a feat of engineering that would make even the most seasoned civil engineer today nod in admiration. And let's not forget the precision. The base of the Great Pyramid is almost a perfect square, with only a tiny deviation of just 58 millimeters. Its sides are aligned with the cardinal points of the compass with an accuracy that would make a GPS blush. It's this kind of precision that has fueled wild theories over the years. But again, this was the result of human ingenuity, not alien intervention. As the sun sets on our discussion of the Great Pyramid, remember this. It's not just a relic of the past. It's a testament to the power of human creativity and determination. The pyramids are a reminder that, given enough time, resources, and motivation, people can achieve the seemingly impossible. So the next time you're stuck in traffic or facing a mountain of paperwork, take a moment to appreciate the fact that you're not hauling multi-ton stones across a desert. And if anyone suggests aliens did it, just smile and nod. After all, some myths are as hard to shake off as the sands of the Sahara. As we wave goodbye to the pyramids and their galactic intrigue, it's time to sail down the Nile, where the temples and tombs stand like ancient Instagram influencers, posing against the backdrop of history. These aren't just a bunch of stone piles. They are the Kardashians of the ancient world, flaunting wealth, power, and divine endorsements. You see, temples and tombs in ancient Egypt weren't just spiritual album listings for the gods and the deceased. They were the ultimate flex, a blend of religious devotion, political propaganda, and economic investment. First, let's talk about religious motivations, because if there's one thing the Egyptians knew how to do, it was to keep the gods on their good side. Temples such as Karnak and Luxor weren't just places to drop off a sacrificial lamb or two. No, they were sprawling complexes, complete with grand halls, obelisks, and enough columns to make a Grecian blush. These structures served as the earthly residences of the gods, and the priests were like the original hospitality managers, ensuring everything was tip-top for divine visits. The economic cost of maintaining these temples could rival a modern-day megachurch, with resources pouring in from all corners of Egypt to keep the gods happy, and in turn, the Nile flooding and the crops growing. Now, if you're thinking these temples and tombs were built by an army of slaves, Hollywood has once again led you astray. Sorry, Ridley Scott. Much like the pyramid builders, the workforce here was more unionized than you might imagine. Skilled laborers, artisans, and craftsmen were the real stars of the show. These guys had serious skill, carving intricate hieroglyphs and crafting statues with precision that would make a Swiss watchmaker envious. They were organized into teams, lived in purpose-built villages, and were compensated with food, beer, and shelter, though probably no dental plan. And what about the economic motivations? Well, constructing these colossal temples wasn't just about keeping up with the Joneses, or the Ramesses, for that matter. It was a massive economic undertaking that required resources from across the kingdom. Think of it as the New Deal of ancient Egypt. The state directed resources into these projects to employ thousands, stimulate trade, and ensure economic stability. Granite for obelisks came from Aswan, alabaster from Luxor, and cedar wood from Lebanon, providing a trade network that would make any modern supply chain manager proud, and probably a little bit jealous. Let's not forget the political motivations behind these monumental constructions. Temples and tombs were the ancient world's answer to Twitter, only with less trolling and more hieroglyphic flair. Pharaohs used them as platforms to broadcast their divine status and accomplishments. You see, each limestone block was a piece of PR, each hieroglyph a carefully crafted tweet, and each statue an influencer's selfie. The walls immortalized not just the pharaoh's piety, but also their military victories and divine lineage. It was propaganda at its finest, ensuring that the pharaoh's legacy endured long after they were mummified and tucked away in the Valley of the Kings. Take the Temple of Hatshepsut, for instance, an architectural marvel that screams, "I am woman, hear me roar." As Egypt's first female pharaoh, Hatshepsut had a lot to prove. Her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari isn't just a resting place, it's an epic statement of power. Built into the cliffs, it features terraces, colonnades, and a causeway that would make any modern architect swoon. It's a structure that shouts, "I'm not just a pharaoh, I'm the pharaoh." The temple's inscriptions and reliefs were Hatshepsut's way of showing she was chosen by the gods, a legitimate ruler in the eyes of the divine and her people. And let's talk about the laborers who built these wonders. They weren't just nameless faces. They were skilled artisans with families, lives, and a sense of community. The workers in Deir el-Medina, the village where many tomb builders lived, enjoyed a sense of camaraderie and mutual support. They even had a type of workers' strike recorded in history when rations were delayed, proving that even thousands of years ago, the workforce knew how to negotiate better conditions. But why go to all this trouble, you ask? Why pour resources into stone edifices when you could be, I don't know, improving the chariot infrastructure? Well, in a world where the afterlife was as real and important as the current one, these constructions were investments in eternity. They were insurance policies against oblivion, ensuring the pharaoh's name and deeds lived on forever. And while these structures served religious and political purposes, they also functioned as economic engines, driving trade and creating jobs. As the Nile's waters reflect the setting sun, casting a golden glow on these ancient structures, remember this. Each temple and tomb is a storybook carved in stone, a testament to the complexities of human ambition, belief, and ingenuity. They remind us that while technology changes, the human drive to leave a mark on the world remains constant. So next time you pass a construction site, give a nod to the modern builders, because their ancient counterparts were setting the stage for humanity's grand architectural symphony millennia ago. As the Nile's waters reflect the setting sun, casting a golden glow on these ancient structures, remember this. Each temple and tomb is a storybook carved in stone, a testament to the complexities of human ambition, belief, and ingenuity. They remind us that while technology changes, the human drive to leave a mark on the world remains constant. So next time you pass a construction site, give a nod to the modern builders, because their ancient counterparts were setting the stage for humanity's grand architectural symphony millennia ago. But while we're busy admiring the grandiosity of pharaohs, eternal resting places, and temples that could give the Vatican a run for its money, let's shift gears and take a closer look at the homes of the folks who didn't have a pyramid in their name. Welcome to the world of the average ancient Egyptian, where the architecture was a little less wow and a bit more watch your step. Meet the typical Egyptian dwelling, where the walls were more mud brick than marble. Imagine a cozy little house, often just a few meters wide, built from sun-dried mud bricks. These bricks were the ancient equivalent of IKEA flat packs, affordable, practical, and sometimes prone to falling apart under pressure. But hey, they got the job done. The average home had a flat roof, which doubled as a sunbathing spot or storage area, depending on your sunburn tolerance. And when I say average home, I mean a small, cramped space with maybe 2 or 3 rooms. It's no sprawling mansion, but it was home's sweet home for many. The materials used for these houses were simple: mud, straw, and reeds. The mud was abundant and didn't exactly break the bank, perfect for a society where the economy was as unpredictable as the Nile's flooding patterns. Despite the humble materials, these homes were surprisingly durable, thanks to the dry climate. Rain was rare, and when it did fall, it was more of a blink and you'll miss it affair. Now, you might be picturing a primitive, bare-bones existence, but Egyptian homes had a few tricks up their sleeves. For one thing, they were designed to keep cool in the sweltering heat. Thick walls and tiny windows ensured that the blazing sun stayed outside where it belonged. And let's not underestimate the power of a good breeze. Strategically placed openings allowed for natural ventilation, turning these mud brick marvels into ancient air-conditioned units. If you think the average Egyptian was lounging around in palatial luxury, let's burst that bubble right now. These homes were more functional than fabulous, and the interiors were minimalist, to say the least. Furnishings were sparse: a few stools, mats for sitting or sleeping, and maybe a chest for the family's meager possessions. But don't let the simplicity fool you. Even these modest homes reflected the social hierarchy. Wealthier families could afford homes with multiple levels or even a courtyard, while the less fortunate squeezed their entire lives into a couple of rooms. And let's talk about the bathroom situation, or lack thereof. The modern notion of ensuite bathrooms was as foreign as the idea of ordering pizza delivery. Most homes had a simple latrine, often shared by several families. Bathing was usually an alfresco affair, with water hauled from the river or a nearby well. In fact, personal hygiene was a public matter, with communal baths and shared facilities. So, where did these homes fit into the grand scheme of things? Well, they were a reflection of the economic and social realities of the time. The simple architecture was a testament to the Egyptians' resourcefulness, using what was readily available. And while the pharaohs were busy immortalizing themselves in limestone, the average Amos was just trying to keep his roof from caving in. Despite the humble conditions, life in these homes wasn't all doom and gloom. Egyptian society was vibrant and community-oriented. Neighbors were more than just people who borrowed your tools. They were extended family. Homes clustered together formed villages, and these villages were the beating heart of Egyptian daily life. Festivals, markets, and communal activities brought people together, fostering a sense of belonging. But let's not romanticize too much. Life was hard, and the social hierarchy was as rigid as a pharaoh's decree. The gap between the haves and the have-nots was as wide as the Nile itself. Wealth determined everything from the size of your home to the clothes on your back. Linen was the fabric of choice, but only the affluent could afford the finest weaves. For the rest, it was a more utilitarian affair. Think burlap chic. And then there's the myth that all Egyptians lived like Cleopatra before Cleopatra was even on the scene. The reality is, while some enjoyed lavish lifestyles, most Egyptians lived simply, working the land or crafting goods. The economy was agrarian, with the Nile's annual flooding dictating the rhythms of life. Farming was the backbone of society, and the average Egyptian was more likely to be found tilling fields than lounging on a chaise longue. In the grand tapestry of history, these modest homes are often overshadowed by the pyramids and temples, but they are no less important. They tell the story of a people who adapted to their environment, who found ways to thrive despite the challenges. They remind us that history isn't just made by kings and conquerors, but by the everyday lives of ordinary people. So next time you hear tales of ancient Egypt, remember the mud brick houses and the people who called them home. They might not have had statues carved in their likeness, but their legacy is just as enduring. Because at the end of the day, whether you're building a pyramid or a mud brick house, the human desire for shelter, community, and a place to call your own is as eternal as the Nile itself. Speaking of the eternal Nile and the enduring human spirit, let's dive into the brilliance of the Egyptians' architectural innovation. Those folks weren't just stacking stones for kicks. They were the original STEM savants, a civilization that transformed geometry into art and precision into power. Take columns. For instance, you might think of them as just fancy stone sticks holding up roofs, but in ancient Egypt, they were the Instagram influencers of architecture, always looking their best and setting trends. Columns were the Egyptians' way of merging function with flair. They didn't just hold things up, they told stories. Imagine walking through the hypo-style hall at Karnak, the largest temple complex ever built. A forest of 134 massive sandstone columns, some soaring 21 meters high, greets you. These columns are inscribed with hieroglyphs and depictions of pharaohs hobnobbing with guards, proof that even in 1250 BCE, people loved to document their lives, albeit in stone rather than selfies. But here's the kicker. These columns were more than just eye candy. They were technological marvels, designed to support vast, open spaces without collapsing under their own weight. The Egyptians pioneered the use of column capitals, those decorative tops that spread the load of the roof. The lotus and papyrus capitals were not just aesthetically pleasing, they were engineering genius at work. By flaring out the tops of the columns, they could distribute weight more evenly, allowing for wider and more stable structures. It's the kind of ingenuity that makes you wonder if ancient architects were secretly time travelers who popped back to grab a civil engineering degree. Now, let's talk obelisks, those iconic stone needles that have become synonymous with Egyptian grandeur. These towering monoliths, often made from a single piece of red granite, were the pharaoh's way of reaching for the stars, literally. The tallest known standing obelisk, the Lateran obelisk, stands a staggering 32 meters and weighs about 455 tons. It's the kind of stonework that makes you stop and ask, how on earth did they do that? Well, the Egyptians were nothing if not resourceful. Quarrying an obelisk was a Herculean task, often taking months or even years. Workers would carve the massive stone out of the ground using only hand tools made from harder rocks like diorite. Once freed, the obelisk was transported to its final location, likely dragged on sledges pulled by hundreds of workers over specially prepared roads. And you thought moving a couch was tough. But why go to all this effort to erect a giant stone needle? Obelisks were more than just oversized lawn ornaments. They were symbols of divine power, dedicated to the sun god Ra. Their pointed tops were designed to pierce the sky, acting as a conduit between the earth and the heavens. Erecting an obelisk was a way for a pharaoh to demonstrate his piety, power, and technical prowess. It was an act of religious devotion wrapped in a political flex. Speaking of flexing, let's not forget the Egyptians' mathematical prowess. These folks were the original number crunchers, using math to turn architectural dreams into reality. They understood the concept of pi long before it became a mathematical celebrity. Their ability to calculate areas, volumes, and angles with precision was nothing short of remarkable. The Great Pyramid of Giza, with its nearly perfect alignment to the cardinal points, is a testament to their mathematical genius. And while we're on the subject of genius, let's talk about cultural exchanges. Ancient Egypt was a melting pot long before the term was coined. Their architectural styles were influenced by interactions with neighboring cultures. Trade and conquest brought new ideas and techniques, which the Egyptians incorporated into their own designs. For instance, the use of stone columns likely drew inspiration from wooden columns found in neighboring regions like Nubia. But let's not romanticize the idea of cultural exchange too much. It wasn't always a peaceful sharing of ideas over a cup of Nile brew. Sometimes it was more like, "Nice temple you got there. Mind if we borrow that column design? Oh, and we'll take your land too." The Egyptians were adept at borrowing and adapting, turning foreign influences into something distinctly Egyptian. Despite the grandeur of their architectural achievements, the reality of construction was anything but glamorous. It involved back-breaking labor, complex logistics, and a workforce that was more skilled artisans than enslaved masses. These workers were organized into teams, each with its own specialization. Masons, carpenters, and metalworkers all played crucial roles. They lived in purpose-built communities, like Deir el-Medina, which provided a glimpse into the lives of those who built Egypt's lasting legacy. And let's not forget the economic engine driving these projects. The construction of temples and monuments was a state-sponsored affair, fueled by the wealth of the Nile. Agriculture was the backbone of the economy, with grain serving as the currency of choice. The surplus generated by the fertile floodplains supported large-scale building projects, enabling the pharaohs to leave their mark on the landscape. The social and political motivations behind these constructions were as complex as the hieroglyphs adorning their walls. Temples were not just places of worship. They were centers of economic and political power. The priests who managed them wielded significant influence, acting as intermediaries between the gods and the people. They were the original lobbyists, ensuring that the interests of the temple, and by extension, the pharaoh, were prioritized. In this grand tapestry of stone and sky, the myths and realities of ancient Egyptian architecture are woven together. While it's tempting to see these structures as mere relics of the past, they are, in fact, enduring symbols of human ambition, creativity, and resilience. They remind us that even in the face of monumental challenges, people can achieve the extraordinary. So, as we stand in the shadow of these ancient giants, let's take a moment to appreciate the genius and tenacity of the people who built them. They may have lived in a world vastly different from ours, but their legacy speaks to the timeless human desire to create, innovate, and inspire. And while the myths of alien architects and mystical powers persist, the truth is far more impressive. These were the achievements of real people, driven by a vision that transcends time. And with that, hold onto your metaphorical hats, because we're about to delve deeper into the labyrinth of Egyptian innovation. As we explore how these ancient architects managed to lift civilization to new heights, quite literally, remember that the journey through their monumental achievements is far from over. Now, as we ride the time machine back to the final act of our saga, it's time to talk about the dazzling legacy that these ancient Egyptian structures have left behind. They've become the high watermark of human ambition, the gold standard of go big or go home. I mean, when your legacy involves building something that people still scratch their heads over millennia later, you know you've hit architectural rock star status. Let's start with the most iconic of them all, the pyramids. These colossal tombstones have become the ultimate symbol of eternal life and power. They've captured the imagination of everyone from Napoleon to your neighbor who swears he saw a documentary on the History Channel about how they were giant energy conductors. Even modern architects can't resist tipping their hats, or hard hats, to the ancient Egyptians. The Louvre Pyramid in Paris, with its modernistic glass and steel structure, is a cheeky nod to the original stone giants of Giza. But let's face it, when it comes to sheer impressiveness, the glass pyramid is more of a nice try than a nailed it. And speaking of trying to replicate the majesty, let's have a moment of silence for all the modern attempts that have fallen a little short. Sure, Vegas has its Luxor Hotel, complete with a replica of the Sphinx that looks like it's been hitting the gym. But when compared to the original, it's like trying to pass off a postcard as the real Grand Canyon. The truth is, The awe-inspiring grandeur of these monuments lies not just in their size, but in their purpose. The pyramids were not just built to impress the neighbors. They were the ultimate investment in the afterlife, a divine retirement plan carved in stone. But it's not all about size. The precision of ancient Egyptian architecture is what truly sets it apart. Take the Great Pyramid, for example. It's aligned so precisely with the cardinal points of the compass that even today's GPS might need a moment to catch up. How did they do it without the benefit of modern technology? Well, chalk it up to a combination of celestial observation and good old-fashioned human ingenuity. While some folks still want to chalk it up to aliens, the truth is that our ancestors were just that good. Now, let's not gloss over the economic realities that made these marvels possible. The pyramids, temples, and tombs were built off the back of a complex economy that revolved around the Nile. This mighty river was the lifeline of ancient Egypt, providing the fertile land necessary for an agricultural surplus that funded these grand projects. It was an economy where grain was the currency, and the pharaoh's ability to mobilize resources was a testament to their political prowess. The construction of these monuments was essentially the New Deal of its day, providing jobs and stabilizing the economy. But let's not romanticize it too much. While the pharaohs were busy immortalizing themselves in stone, the average Egyptian was more concerned with making sure their mud brick house didn't melt in the rare rain. The social gap between the elite and the common folk was as wide as the Great Pyramid's base. Yet, this disparity was not just a bug of the system, it was a feature. The grandeur of the monuments was as much about showcasing the pharaoh's divine right to rule as it was about ensuring their safe passage to the afterlife. Now, what about the impact of these structures beyond Egypt's borders? Well, they've been cultural ambassadors long before the concept of soft power became a thing. The Greeks were so impressed by the grandeur of Egyptian temples and their architectural prowess that they incorporated elements into their own designs. And let's not forget the Romans, who were so enamored with obelisks that they carted them back to Rome, inadvertently kickstarting a trend that would see these stone needles sprout up in cities across the globe. Today, these ancient wonders continue to inspire awe and curiosity. They're the rock stars of the archaeological world, drawing tourists from every corner of the globe. And while some visitors might be more concerned with getting that perfect selfie than pondering the deeper historical significance, there's no denying the enduring allure of these structures. They offer a tangible connection to the past, a reminder of what humans can achieve when they set their minds to it. So, what's the lasting legacy of ancient Egyptian architecture? It's a testament to the power of human ingenuity, the drive to leave a mark on the world, and the desire for immortality. These structures have outlasted the pharaohs who built them, the civilizations that rose and fell around them, and even the myths that have sprung up in their wake. They've become symbols of the eternal, a reminder that while human life is fleeting, our achievements can endure through the ages. As we wrap up this epic journey through the sands of time, take a moment to appreciate the marvels that these ancient architects have left behind. They remind us that the past is not just a collection of dusty relics, but a source of inspiration and wonder. And while we may never fully unravel all the mysteries they hold, the pursuit of knowledge, much like the pyramids themselves, is a testament to the enduring human spirit. So next time you gaze upon these ancient wonders, remember, they were built by people just like us, with dreams of eternity and a desire to be remembered. And in their stones, they've achieved just that, eternal life, carved in the annals of history.